You ever speak to me like that again, better be wearing a cup.
Baby steps.
One break, I'm in
Okay, friends, let's everybody take your positions, please. Here we go. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, rolling. Dave!
And
Welcome to Dave and Dave Unchained, a Van Halen podcast. I'm Dave.
And I'm Dave.
And we are at episode 91, Dave. We're in the middle of the summer. It's hot as balls outside. I am back from Italy, and we're all guns a-blazing.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. He's not fucking around, folks. He's cranky as hell. I'm going to warn you, it's late, so he's going to be edgy. So we're all going to stop wasting time and get right into Van Halen news.
Van Halen
News! Okay, great. Well, listen. Our friend Wolf Van Halen has dropped another song, his third single from his album Mammoth 2. And the song is Take a Bow. Here's a clip. Now, this is the song we've been hearing about because he is using Eddie Van Halen's Frankenstein guitar and his Marshall amps and everything from the original Van Halen 1 album. This has been an incredible build-up, and the song is really, really cool. It blends a lot of his influences. There's pop, there's hard rock, there's alternative, and it's a well-put-together song. It's a long one, 6 minutes and 54 seconds, so it's an epic journey for sure. Dave, what did you think of Take a Bow?
I liked it a lot. My favorite song so far from the new album. I think his solo on that song is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
It's definitely not a coincidence that when he's using Ed's equipment, he sounds the most like Ed.
Right.
I think his solo is the most Ed-like out of everything I've heard so far. His song is a little long, but really well done. I mean, I like this like 10 times better than the second single he released. This is really encouraging. I think it's one of my favorite songs of his overall, so I'm very interested to hear what the rest of the album sounds like.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of that solo, let's get a clip of that right here. Well, the solo comes in about 4 minutes and 3 seconds into the song and goes all the way to 5 minutes and 20 seconds. So it's over a minute long. As you can tell, like Dave said, there's the Eddie Van Halen flavor in there. You can really hear that DNA flowing through for sure. I love the lyrics on this song. I think his heart is really in it. You can tell he's kind of hitting his stride here. The blend of his talent and his passion is kind of hitting a sweet spot. So to say this shows real progression is an understatement. It's definitely miles above Like a Pastime for sure, like Dave said. I am curious to see how the record's going to flow. This song comes right smack in the middle of the record in the order listing there, like a centerpiece, I guess, in the middle of the album. So this is looking good to see what's going to happen with Mammoth 2. So looking forward to that. That's coming up next month. Now, speaking of Wolf, he, like I said, had taken out Eddie's original Frankenstein guitar and his his original Marshall amp head and cab combos that he used on the solo for the song. He said, "It was the last song we finished. It's officially the longest song I've released to date, and I feel the guitar solo is really special. I played the solo on the original Frankenstein guitar and through Dad's original Marshall head and one of his original cabinets. It's straight up what he used on the earliest Van Halen records, and it makes me happy to capture some of Dad's history on this song forever." That's a real special moment. I think it's one of many special things I've recorded with Mammoth. So he's very excited about that. He's been doing a lot of press on the album. He had said that in one of his recent interviews. He also talked about the song, and he said apparently he has a interesting way that he taps, which is different from the way most people tap on the guitar there. So he has a two-hand tap-heavy guitar solo on here, as we all heard earlier. And his two-handed tapping approach is a little different. The quirk is concerned with his tapping hand, whereas many guitarists opt to use the middle finger to tap, owning the guitar pick to holding the logistics. Wolfie tends to use his index finger to do the job, just as Eddie used to. And Wolfgang talked about that in Total Guitar. He said, "I guess my approach just came from growing up and watching Dad do it. I've been around tapping my whole life. What I often do is grip the neck with the thumb on my right hand, which frees up the index finger to tap. That's just how I've always done it. I feel like every song, or at least every solo, has a tapping lick at some point. And this particular index finger approach to the technique goes against the popular trend that most people do. For example, Steve Vai leads with his middle and ring fingers. Yngwie Malmsteen also uses his middle finger when he taps. And in his Total Guitar interview, Wolfgang went on to talk about his tips for tapping. He said, "You should be more in line and parallel with the neck." He said, "Just watch videos of Dad doing it and you'll see how he got that sound. I guess it comes down to practicing like anything else. The more time you put in, the better you'll get at it." So, very interesting that the two of them have a very similar approach. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I guess that's just how he learned it, right? From, either consciously or subconsciously from watching his dad. When I was online, I was reading a few guitar players who were like, "Oh yeah, how does he do it that way? I don't even know how he would hold the pick that way." And then there were some others who were like, "Oh yeah, I do it the same way. I don't understand why that's so weird." So apparently it's not as uncommon as you would think. But I'm not a guitar player, so I couldn't tell you one way or the other. But,
right.
Just one of those things, I guess, when you learn even indirectly from somebody, the way you pick it up a certain way, and you don't even think twice about it until you learn how other people are playing it. Then you're like, oh, I guess I'm doing that differently after all.
Absolutely. Wolf also went out to tweet a picture of him and his fiancée Andrea, and they were out at the premiere for the Barbie movie. And the reason he was doing that is because he's on the score/soundtrack. And he said, "If anyone is curious about the specifics, I have a lot of textural stuff throughout the film on two major spots where I do some soloing. One in particular is pretty cool because it's the big song that Ryan Gosling sings and Slash plays on it as well. There's a specific moment in the song that's only in the movie where I got this fun solo and I did some tapping and stuff. Such a cool opportunity. Honored to be a part of it." So, Wolf's really getting out there, Dave. Now he's in a movie soundtrack. Can you believe that?
Yeah, Barbie, right?
Yep, Barbie. I can't believe so many people are excited about the goddamn Barbie film. I don't understand.
I know. I've been reading a lot about that. It's getting some pretty good press. But interesting that he is following in his father's footsteps, doing some soundtrack work.
Right. Very early on in his career. And Wolf is continuing to roll out all kinds of news because he announced a fall tour. If you can believe that. So, following up his run with Metallica in U.S. stadiums, he's going to be launching a headlining tour where he's going to be doing fall dates with Nita Strauss, the guitarist. She's amazing. She used to play with Alice Cooper. And now he's starting on November 4th 4th in Milwaukee at the Rave, and he's going straight through for a whole series of dates all the way to December 9th in Los Angeles at the Belasco Theater. So that's interesting. He's not coming near you or me, though, Dave. He's not coming to New York. He's not coming to Connecticut. He is coming to Jersey and Philadelphia. Something tells me he's avoiding us. What do you think?
Well, I wasn't so surprised about Connecticut because that's like flipping a coin if someone's going to play here. Although he has played Connecticut,
Yeah.
I think like at least once, maybe twice since he was touring solo. So I was kind of surprised he's not back again. But I was really surprised he wasn't at least playing somewhere in New York City or even Long Island. I know he's playing in Jersey, I think in Sayreville, which is kind of sort of centrally located.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. He's not sitting down doing nothing. He's putting out the album. He's opening up for Metallica on certain dates, and he's doing the solo tour. And who else is he opening up for?
Well, he recently did a couple of dates with Motley Crue and Def Leppard. So
right. And then he was doing a European tour too, right?
He was doing a European tour, and he was touring with Metallica. He did a couple dates on the stadium tour. He's been at festivals, lots of festivals. He is really going full guns.
No, good. I mean, get out there and play, man. That's what the people want.
That's right. Also want to let you guys know about the Red Rocker, Sammy Hagar. Want you guys to check out the Bob Lefsetz podcast. Last name's a little confusing. It's L-E-F as in Frank, S as in Sam, E-T as in Tom, and Z as in Zebra. The Bob Lefsetz podcast. Sammy did a really extensively long interview. I'm going to say it's over an hour and a half. And it's really...
Yeah, it's about that long.
Yeah, definitely want to check this out. Really, really different. It's really getting into Sam's background. You hear a lot from Sam, as you well know. He goes on Eddie Trunk's show, and half the time Eddie's just kissing his ass 24 hours a day, which is fine. I know he loves Sam, and that's all fine. But, you don't get a lot of juice sometimes out of that. I'm going to just highlight one part that he talked about Alex. He doesn't talk about Van Halen a lot in that interview. I have never seen him do an interview as extensive as this without him talking extensively about Van Halen. Now, interesting though, it's still great because Sam's a great guest, but it's very interesting. He talks about his businesses, how he built up Cabo, all that. It is really fascinating. I have to be honest with you. Did a great job. Sammy was very open, but I'm going to highlight here what he said about Al. He talked about him. He says, I've smacked Al 100 times, meaning like he hit him up. Please contact me, Al. Let's meet there. Let's start making some music. You understand what I mean? It's not about attempting to imitate Van Halen. It's all about pleasing the supporters. For God's sake, let's play that song together. Why not? When the lead vocalist is still alive. You still have two of them. One is more difficult to operate, but Mikey, Al, and I, let's just go play music. He simply will not answer. Since Eddie's death, he's been completely shut down with me. I'm gonna go out there and play the fucking music. That's what he had to say on that podcast. It was towards the very end of the podcast, too. It's a little confusing that he didn't talk much about Van Halen, but he did mention that on that Bob Lefsetz podcast. Dave, have you heard that?
Yes, I think that was a great podcast, one of the better interviews he's done lately. I know it's an hour and a half, but I think most people listen to this podcast can deal with a long podcast. So I would definitely recommend everybody listen to it because it's not the typical Sammy interview. As you point out, he talks a lot about his businesses.
Yep.
It's not too Van Halen heavy, but it's still very interesting and worth the time.
Absolutely. Also want to let you guys know about Sammy's new dates. He's going to be touring in October. Now, we all know that he always goes out for his birthday, so he announced his 76th birthday bash at the Cabo Wabo Cantina October 9th, 11th, and 13th. They're already sold out because he does that lottery thing, and they all sell out really quick. But he's also going to be playing at the venue Horseshoe Casino, and that's in Hammond, Indiana on October 20th. He's also playing Firekeepers Casino at the Battle Creek, Michigan, October 21st. He's playing at Peace Center Concert Hall in Greenvale, South Carolina, October 25th. He's also playing the St. Augustine's Amphitheater in St. Augustine, Florida, October 26th. The Sound at Coachman Park in Clearwater, Florida, October 28th. And then the Hard Rock Live in Hollywood, Florida, October 29th. So he's doing a run in the fall, which is his birthday month. What do you think of that, Dave?
Very cool. Very nice to see him out there. I know this year he's not doing that much, but it sounds like he's starting to pick things up a bit. So any live shows we can get from Sam are really, I don't want to call them gravy, but, the guy is getting in his late 70s. So,
yeah.
It's kind of like, hey, we still have the opportunity to see him. So take advantage of it while we can.
Absolutely. Now, congratulations go out to Sam because he is going to be in the Hollywood Walk of Fame class of 2024. So they vote on this through the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, and certain people from different walks of entertainment, whether it's motion pictures, television, and he's in the category of recording. So he's getting in along with Glenn Ballard, who also produced Van Halen during the Best of Both Worlds new tracks. That was the producer there. Tony Braxton, Def Leppard, Charles Fox, Brandy Norwood, Darius Rucker, Gwen Stefani, and Andre Dr. Dre Young. So that's Dr. Dre, as we all know him. And yeah, so he's going to be in that class. Sammy is getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Dave, what do you think?
That's awesome. I mean, good for him. That's big. So I know he's super excited about that. I think there was a clip of him and his wife, Carrie, talking about it or finding out about it. So congrats, Sam. I know he's super stoked. Well deserved.
Absolutely. And Sammy was a guest on Eddie Trunk's new show. Now, we all know he does Trunk Nation on Sirius XM, right? Well, everybody has been begging Eddie to redo that metal show. But he can't because VH1 Classic, I think he was on, no longer exists. And him and Don Jameson and Jim Florentine, the two comedians that he does it with, they all were looking for a home for that metal show for many years. So they have decided to go on YouTube and do this show. Now, it's not exactly that metal show. It doesn't have the production value. It's basically a glorified Zoom meeting. So it's Eddie on there with Don and Jim. They do some of the things they used to do on that metal show, but it's very casual. They're sort of dicking around. It's called That Rocks. If you guys want to check that out, it's on YouTube. It's a little more low-key Trunk. Eddie's not as amped up as he is on the air. He's a little more low-key, but you see him on there. It's visual, obviously. It's on YouTube, so you can see the whole thing. So that's happening, but he also had both Sam and Mike on as guests separately. So just to start off with Sam, obviously they talked about the whole Alex situation, and he said it's the same old story. The same old fucking story. Alex won't respond to me. I reached out to him. I haven't done it in a long time now because it's like, hey, you want to talk to me? Call me. You can tell he's getting mad now. But there's not going to be a Van Halen reunion. First of all, it's too late. I've already said it a million times. Wolfie is doing a great job with what he's doing, and he would be the perfect guy to play guitar, but that's out. Dave and I are still alive, but there's no way he would cooperate with me. So if he goes out by himself, that's not a Van Halen reunion. That's half a Van Halen reunion. If I go out by myself without him, it's half a Van Halen reunion. Only good news about that is I could sing his songs just fine. But Mike and I are like this. And he did his crossed fingers. And if Al wants to come and play with us, I would love to play with Al. I said it recently that I would love to play music with Al. I would like to write a song with Al. I would like to go in the studio and jam with Al. But the thought of a Van Halen reunion without Eddie, no, there's no such thing. So you could tell Sam's getting a little hot under the collar there, Dave. What did you make of that?
Well, it relates back to the other interview where he was complaining about Alex. And it's like, Sam, how many times are you going to complain about this? It's obvious he's not going to return your call. It's obvious he's not even going to take your call. So get over it and move on.
Yeah.
He's like a jilted girlfriend who can't get over it.
Yep.
It's like, Sam, you've got so much going for you, and you're crying about this? Really, honestly, Sam, I don't know why you're so surprised. I mean, you reconciled things with Ed, okay, but, maybe Ed just wanted to go peacefully, right? Let bygones be bygones.
Right.
Alex is not in that position, and by all accounts, he's the very stubborn one. So you got that there too. So Sam, just move on. It's not happening. I mean, it's definitely not happening now, right? It's 3 years after the fact, but I think Sam knows that because I think Sam is just going on. He's been talking about doing his own thing, which is what he should be doing at this point. Don't bother holding your breath, waiting for something else to happen. Do your own thing, and maybe the others will catch up to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing that came out of this interview that was shocking. This shocked me, and it's rare that Sammy shocks me, but holy shit, Dave. So he talked about his experience opening for Kiss in 1977 at Madison Square Garden in February. And I was like, all right, so he opened for Kiss on 10 shows on the Rock and Roll Over Tour, and it started at Madison Square Garden. And apparently, as you well know, and maybe you haven't, David, because you're not a big Kiss fan, but you don't go to shows, but Kiss fans sometimes are very impatient with opening acts because they're rabid Kiss fans and they only want Kiss. They want Kiss to take the stage and fuck you and get off if you're opening. This is back in the day for sure. Nowadays, it's a little more low-key. It's like going to Ringling Brothers at this point. So Sam opened up, and apparently he wasn't announced as the opening act. So no one even knew he was going to appear. He just went on stage. So Kiss is at the peak of their popularity. He goes out to do his show. He says, they didn't even know I was going to be there. So I'm the guy who came out and announced it. And he said, I'm standing on the side of the stage and I'm pumped. And this guy goes, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sammy Hagar. And the fucking place started booing. They didn't even know who the fuck I was. So apparently he decided to whip out his cock on stage, which, by the way, is illegal. You're not allowed to do that. In fact, I believe Jim Morrison got arrested for doing something like that.
Allegedly, I think there's varying degrees of accuracy or perception depending on who you ask. I don't know all the details, but I seem to remember, some band members said he did.
Yeah.
Others said
one
he
of those
didn't.
legendary things.
Right. I mean, but either way, I think he got arrested for it. So somebody thought he did,
Yeah, it's crazy.
But that's a very brazen move.
And it's also shocking for Sam. That seems like something like, I don't know, Ted Nugent would do or something.
Well, it does seem out of character.
Yeah.
And it does seem surprising that, nobody ever heard about this. I was reading about this online, and one person just flat out said, that's a lie. He's lying. He has to be lying. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it makes for a good story because Sammy was just the opening act. Maybe nobody even cared, They just booed him off the stage. He could have gotten naked on stage and nobody would have cared. They just wanted to see Kiss.
I just want to know why they didn't nickname him the Red Cocker.
Well, that... He could have milked that for all it was worth, right?
That's right. He could have. Now, moving on to Michael Anthony. So Michael Anthony was on That Rocks, and, he goes on there, and he was talking with the guys, and they're always dicking around, but he told an interesting Roth story. So he shared a story about Roth being on the road. He says there was always drama on the Roth tours. He said, I'll give you a quick story. Just how it was with Dave on tour. We were staying somewhere in the Midwest, and after this, he says, we kind of came to the conclusion that Dave was bipolar. He says, because he would be great. Then all of a sudden, he would just kind of freak out or whatever. And one night, we had a night off, and everybody was doing what they were doing. It was around midnight or 1 in the morning, and everybody was pretty much back in the hotel. And I hear this commotion in the hall, and pounding and screaming, and I'm going, what the hell's going on? So I put on my shorts and I go walking down the hall, and our security guys got Roth in a straitjacket, and our security guys carried a small straitjacket with them on tour, and I won't get into that part, but they used used to carry a small straitjacket with them. He says, but Roth was screaming naked in the middle of one of our security guys' rooms where he was wearing a straitjacket. And he says, Dave used to like to drink Jack Daniels, but he couldn't handle it like I could handle it. Dave have a little bit of Jack, and he'd get a little crazy. And I guess how they found him wandering around outside the hotel naked, and that was just one of 7 nights a week being on tour with Dave. What do you make of that, Dave?
That's a great story. That's not the first straitjacket story I've heard with Dave.
Yeah.
Very interesting, for sure.
Absolutely. I think Noel had one in his book, if I remember. There was something about that in his book, I think. Speaking of Dave, Dave, he's still releasing these nutball videos. They're starting to really depress me now. He's got this one out called Living in Paradise, where he's like wandering around his garden, playing just like Paradise, which was absolutely sad. Then he has a video where he's dancing beautifully to like disco music, and its title of video is called Vote for Pedro, which is sort of a reference to the Napoleon Dynamite film. These videos are absolutely bizarre. Now, the video of Dave dancing is gotta be 10 years old. It's from, I think, 2013. I don't think Dave can move like that anymore, to be honest with you.
Yeah, he doesn't have the mutton chops.
No,
his hair's not great.
I
definitely think you're right
I
about
think
that.
these are catalog content that he's dropping out there to stay somewhat in the public eye, but they are absolutely fucking-zar. I mean, they're crazy and all over the place. Did you see these?
Oh, the clips? Yeah. You know, but it's one of those things where I watch him once and I'm like, he needs to get out of that house.
Oh, yeah.
He really needs to get out.
Something. He needs something, that guy. Holy shit. But, oh, my God. Also, our friend Neil Schon from Journey, the lead guitarist of Journey, who knows Eddie from back in the day, from his first tour, he did a little tribute to Ed on social media. Neil went on there and he shared a clip of him kind of doing a shred workout, which he called a little tribute to Eddie Van Halen. In the paragraph underneath the video, he said, a little tribute to Ed. It was so amazing to be on Van Halen's first tour with him. I watched him annihilate every single night and was grateful I didn't have to follow him. So that was kind of cool. And it's about 3 minutes and 35 seconds. The video shows Sean with his Eddie Van Halen Stripe Series electric guitar. He's playing this huge virtuosic display of shred talent, and he's just going viciously fast and picking and two-hand tapping and doing killer vibrato, so it's really, really cool. Here's a little clip of it right here. So, Dave, what did you think of Neil Schon going off as a tribute to Ed?
So underrated. That guy is so underrated.
Yeah.
He can play as good as almost anybody else. That was nice. Nice little tasty clip. I enjoyed that.
Absolutely. And speaking of Ed, those of you who have the Eddie Van Halen Funko Pop are going to be excited that a new one is coming out. We all have the one from 1984. He's in the patchwork jeans with the Dice t-shirt, right? With the red bandana. Guess what? They're coming out with a Van Halen 1 era one. This is really cool, Dave. It's got the white guitar with the black stripes from the Eddie Van Halen Stripe series, the brown pants with the vertical striped shirt with the open chest, the feathered hair. It looks really, really cool. If you go to Funko.com, Funko.com, you can sign up to find out when it's going to be available. They'll hit you up with an email and you can order one. So what do you think of that, Dave? The first one was so popular, they're making a second one.
Yeah, and it's really frighteningly accurate to what he was wearing on the first album cover. There was really a lot of attention to detail they put onto that piece.
For sure. Now, there's a great article that came out on Extreme by author Paul Brannigan from Classic Rock Magazine that I all urge you to go out and check out. But I I wanted to highlight something here, what they talked about with the Van Halen 3 era. Obviously, Gary Cherone was the lead singer of Van Halen. In Van Halen 3, obviously the lead singer of Extreme. So I always wondered about this, Dave, about what Nuno Bettencourt's involvement was when he found out that Gary Cherone was going to go up for the lead singer part in Van Halen. Apparently, in this interview, Bettencourt encouraged Gary to believe that he was a perfect fit for the role. This is Gary speaking. He says, I remember Nuno saying, of course you're going to get the job. Your whole career has been leading to this. And that was very encouraging. And Eddie and I met, it just clicked. He was so human and so inviting, and working together was pure joy. People can think whatever they want about the record we made, but I'm proud of it, and so was Eddie. I believe that the man or woman upstairs put us both here to play music. This is what Eddie said to Gary. And he says, and it feels like I've been waiting 20 years for this guy to come along. This is when he did press for Van Halen 3. But a lot of the reviews were not favorable for Van Halen 3, and in fact, one of them was scathing from Kerrang, which said the fundamental problem with this album is the songs. They're shit. Which is brutal.
But that's fairly accurate, to be fair.
When Paul brought this up to Cherone said, I think there are some great songs on that record. It's a different record to what Van Halen did before, but it's a moment in time, and the songs stand up well. Van Halen 3 obviously went on to become the first Van Halen album not to go platinum in the United States. And that kind of caused Gary to leave on amicable terms in 1999. But interesting article, Dave. What do you think of this?
It was an interesting article. Again, I don't necessarily disagree on their perspective on Van Halen 3. It was interesting in that it gave you insight into what Nuno thought about the situation at the time, that he and Gary were still talking, even though the band had broken up. I mean, Nuno was really the big Van Halen fan.
Oh, and Pat Badger. Both of them.
Pat Badger too? Okay,
Pat Badger absolutely loves Van Halen, and so does Nuno. In fact, very often when Extreme does sound check, Pat and Nuno play Van Halen songs.
Oh, that's awesome.
Isn't that awesome?
So there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. So also want to let you know that Gary sent out a tweet to his buddy Michael Anthony and his former band member on Michael's birthday. And what did he say? Happy birthday to the best fucking singer in Van Halen. And it showed a picture of Gary with Mike, and I thought that was really sweet, Dave. What did you think of that?
Yeah, that was a nice picture. I like that.
Absolutely. So. Now, you guys know Bill and Ted, right? From the Bill and Ted movies. And they always joke around in the Bill and Ted movies about how much they love Eddie Van Halen. Keanu Reeves was even wearing a 5150 Van Halen shirt in the movie. Apparently, Eddie Van Halen nearly appeared in the third film of the Bill and Ted series. So they had the third film, which is called Bill and Ted Face the Music. And Alex Winter, the actor who plays Bill S. Preston Esquire in the film, he was on Darren Paltrowitz's Paltrocast, and he talked about it. And he said, we ask Eddie to be in every single movie, and every single movie he said no. So when we got to Bill and Ted 3, this was somewhat of a bittersweet anecdote. He notes that we had a whole sequence where we ended up with Dave Grohl, but it was supposed to be Eddie Van Halen. And what happened was we went to Eddie. We were like, would you please be in the third movie? And he was like, you know what, guys? This one I would have done. But he was dying at that point, and he was really quite sick, and he didn't tell us that he was literally going to pass, but he was like, I'm not well, I can't do it, but I really appreciate these films, and I love them. If I wasn't so sick, I would absolutely come down to New Orleans and shoot this with you. So it had kind of a bittersweet end, Winter said. He said it was a running joke in the Bill and Ted little family of ours. He said that every single movie would be like knocking on Eddie's door, and he'd be like, no, and slamming it in our face, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. So that's too bad that he wasn't well, because that would have been fun, right, Dave?
What could have been.
What could have been, that's true. And wrapping up Van Halen news is an item about how Eddie Van Halen drastically affected the guitar sound of Def Leppard's Hysteria. And I'm going to tell you how. So Phil Collen, who is the guitarist for Def Leppard, talks about how his meeting with Ed really changed everything. So he was recently doing an interview with Music Radar, and he recalled a brief encounter he had with Eddie Van Halen before Def Leppard formed. And he said that he gave him crucial advice that would heavily shape the band's 1997 album Hysteria. He said, when I first met Eddie, it was on Van Halen's first British headline tour at the Rainbow in Fitzbury Park, London. He was so humble, and considering he was such a monster player, I couldn't believe it. He was talking about his guitars, and I had this Strat that my mom had gotten for me for my 21st birthday, and it was the main guitar I used later on the Hysteria stuff. Whenever you hear anything on that record, it's probably that. So when I told him I had this beautiful Strat that I love, he actually said, you know, you won't be happy until you've taken that pickup out and carved out space for a humbucker. Then he ripped out the single coil and carved out room for the humbucker, put in a DiMarzio, and to be fair, if Eddie Van Halen told us to take off the electric guitar strings and replace them with shoelaces, we probably would have done it. I thought, fuck, Collins said, but I did it because Eddie told me to do it. We put a DiMarzio in there, and yeah, whenever you hear like the song Animal or any of those other tracks, that's what you are hearing. And he called Eddie the most important rock player after Jimi Hendrix. He said Eddie really could make his guitar sing. It was all very natural. The main difference between them was that Hendrix was a singer, and that meant he had a different approach to the guitar. So what do you make of that, Dave?
I thought that was a great story. I never heard that one before. That doesn't surprise me that Eddie was like, oh, no, you got to take it apart and fix it and put it back together, because Ed was always doing that, right?
Yeah.
So anytime he could convince somebody else to do it, I guess was a good day for him. When I first saw that headline, I'm like, influenced the sound of Hysteria. How did Ed do that? I'm not seeing that connection at all. But then I read the article. I'm like, oh, look at that. So I like hearing these stories because it makes me realize that Ed interacted with a lot of other musicians more than I thought he did.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I just have visions of him locked up at 5150 with Al, jamming all day when they weren't touring or making albums. So it was nice to read that he was actually out and about talking to other artists and stuff like that.
Oh, he loved that. And you know what he also loved? And this is in Ted Templeman's book. If he entered a room and saw a guitar like sitting in the corner, he'd have to pick it up and fix it or do something to it. Like, I remember there's a story in Ted's book that's phenomenal. Like, it was like this piece of shit guitar. It was like falling apart. And it was like sitting in the corner. And Ed, he couldn't help himself. He like grabbed it, and all night long he was fiddling with it and thinking, oh, give me a screwdriver, give me this. By the end of the night, he was playing the guitar and sounded amazing. A lot of people say, you know, he's known for his playing and the songs he wrote, right? Of course. But a lot of people, especially the guitar people, will tell you he is unbelievably influential in the guitar community for his creation of guitars and his equipment and tone way above the songs, the glitz, the rock star shit, like all of that stuff, and his playing. Aside from all of that, they said his influence in the guitar industry in terms of construction is amazing too. Very underrated that way.
Yes, indeed.
Anyway, that wraps up Van Halen news.
And that's the way it is. Good night.
And we are on to our interview with Jason Bonham, the drummer for The Circle. He's been playing with Sammy for about 10 years now. It's incredible. He talks about a huge preview of what's going to happen next year with The Circle. And let me tell you something. It's incredibly Van Halen-centric. You are not going to want to miss that interview. But before that happens, there is going to be another unbelievable interview, and this is with Alan Berry. Now, you guys know Alan Berry because he was our May guest, right? He was just here in May. What the hell's he doing in our July episode? Well, let me tell you something. Alan is the one who put out the Van Halen 1984 docu-series, or at least tried to, and then went through an entire ordeal to get it out. Well, guess what? He's figured out a way to put it out, and he tells us the entire story. That involves David Lee Roth, that involves Alex Van Halen, that involves Warner Brothers Records. He gave us the scoop on what happened to him since we last spoke, and it is filled with Van Halen information. So you're not going to want to miss that. But you know, we cannot complete an episode without nailing Dave with tons of mailbag, and oh, this is a big, thick mailbag. We got 19 letters to get through. So plenty of good stuff, and that's all coming up next. Take a listen.
There's a lot of enthusiasm out there. I think people want to participate in rock and roll a little bit more than usual when they come to see Van Halen. And I think our audience has the same thing that I always look for in people is three qualities. That's a sense of humor, and that's a certain kind of passion, and a whole lot of fury.
If you need a dose of VH, get a taste of the closest thing. Romeo Delight, the ultimate Van Halen tribute band, playing all the hits from the David Lee Roth era, first classic 6 albums, plus deep cuts, some of which have never been played live before by the band. They even throw in popular tracks from the Sammy Hagar era and solo hits. The most viewed Van Halen tribute band on YouTube, Romeo Delight, doing customized recreations of staging, instruments, and costumes from the classic Van Halen era. They even perform entire Van Halen albums in sequence. Romeo Delight plays theaters, casinos, summer indoor and outdoor festivals, and special events. They're also available for private parties. To contact them, call Bud Blanche at 215-704-5144. That's 215-704-5144. Or via email at sonicparade1@yahoo.com. Romeo Delight, the ultimate Van Halen tribute band. The long-awaited Van Halen book from legendary rock journalist Steve Rosen is here. Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen. This is an over 400-page odyssey of Rosen's decades interviewing and being friends with the late guitar god, Eddie Van Halen. Rosen says, I spent 14 long, hard months writing Tone Chaser. It was both the most difficult story I've ever written and the most rewarding. I wanted to be honest and transparent as I possibly could, which was not always an easy thing to do. In the end, this was the most complete and comprehensive book I could have possibly written. There was nothing left to say when I reached the last page. With every word I wrote, I was reminded of the time I spent with Edward, and that hurt terribly. But it also brought back what a remarkable experience that was, and how insanely lucky I had been to have ever known him, and astonishingly to have been friends with him. I hope you can feel everything I felt. That is the purpose of this book. Pre-sales are currently going on now for the self-published book. PayPal Steve directly at scrosen@sbcglobal.net. That's scrosen@sbcglobal.net. It's $47 for those who are buying it inside the U.S., and that includes shipping. $95 for those who are buying it overseas, and that includes shipping. Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen. Don't miss out. Order it today.
Hey, this is Steve Stevens, and you're listening to Dave and Dave Unchained.
Author Greg Renoff is back with a new book, Ted Templeman, A Platinum Producer's Life and Music. The new biography of the record producer Ted Templeman, who went on to produce Van Halen, the Doobie Brothers, Van Morrison, Aerosmith, Sammy Hagar, and more. The book, which runs $19.95, and it's currently available at Amazon.com. From the man who brought you Van Halen Rising comes Ted Templeman, A Platinum Producer's Life and Music, written by Templeman as told to Greg Renoff. Available for only $19.95 at Amazon.com. Order it today. Need a laugh? Check out the Funny How Comedy Podcast, which focuses on upbeat conversations with legendary comedians. It's free on Spreaker and iTunes. Check us out on Facebook at Funny How Comedy Podcast, on Twitter at Funny How Podcast, on Instagram at Funny How Comedy Podcast, or email us at funnyhowcomedypodcast@gmail.com.
It's a constant movement. Who needs dead space? A lot of people have nothing to say. in between songs. I love talking. I love telling jokes. For me, this is just one big wet T-shirt contest, you know. And so if you stop, you're going to talk, you're going to introduce things. How many bands have you heard? They get on stage and, oh, well, here's one off our 15th album. Hot dog time. Let's go get a hot dog, baby.
All right, Dave, you know what time it is.
Dave and Dave's mailbag is big and round. Dave says he's tired, can't lift it off the ground. Wants a light bag, likes those the best. And he likes the short mail better than the rest. And he said, well, I think that you're headed for a whole lot of letters. Well, I think that you're headed for a whole lot of letters. Well, I think that you're headed for a boatload of letters. And letter number 1 comes from...
That's right, it's mailbag time again. And we got a whole bunch of letters, so we're starting with letter number 1, coming from Matt Krill. Hi, Dave and Dave. Please accept my apology for the gross oversight on the Trevor Rabin, Eddie Van Halen, Beluga Ethereum connection. Somehow I missed the fact that Trevor Rabin and Eddie Van Halen had discussed this matter, and I should be burnt at the stake under a pile of VH3 albums. I do stand by my assertion that so many guitarists borrow from each other, and if they talked and Eddie actually gave Rabin a heads up, that's more than most artists did in the 80s when trying to mimic Eddie Van Halen. It wasn't the first time Van Halen took an original and made it better and more memorable. While I understand your asterisk, I hope you'll remove it and enjoy the song for what it really is. Hopefully the length of this letter is more digestible too. I don't want 3 strikes on my mailbag submissions. Keep up the good work. What is understood needn't be discussed. Matt Krill. Well, Matt, I have no problem with Beluga Ethereum. I actually love the song. I wish every Van Halen album actually had an instrumental. I always thought Inside on 5150 should have been an instrumental jam. Sucker in a 3-piece on OU812 should have been an instrumental jam. And Pleasure Dome on For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge should have been an instrumental jam. But no worries, bro. It's all good. I just put an asterisk because if you literally take a riff from another artist, I do believe that you should credit that artist properly, and you need to take care of that. This is not the first time Van Halen did this. 1984, Michael McDonald wasn't properly credited for I'll Wait, which was insane, and I just don't like that fact. I don't think it's cool. What do you think, Dave?
No, I agree with you on that one. If you're going to use somebody else's stuff, you got to give them proper credit.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Letter number 2 comes from Louise in London, UK. And she says, I listened to your latest podcast when you were interviewing a fan who made the 5-episode series Van Halen 1984 on YouTube. He commented that we will never know why the band split because everyone he discussed this with has always said something different, including the band members and other key people. I understand why he came up with such a conclusion. However, why is it then that a majority of the Van Halen staff left Eddie to go work for Dave's new band? We know this happened because during your podcast, the person commented that the split was handled very badly by the record label because whoever was in charge of PR had left the band and was now working for Dave. So there was no press release or announcements to fans or the public as a result, and it was very unprofessionally handled. What does this tell you? It's a huge clue in solving the mystery because it tells you that someone in authority organized for all the staff to be moved over to Dave's new band with their new roles, salaries, payroll, etc. Who could have this been? Only someone senior in a position of authority like Warner Brothers, and this would have all have been agreed with Eddie, Alex, and Dave. This is my understanding of the split and that it was managed and arranged by the record company because it couldn't have been a mere coincidence that the many staff just happened to be moved over to Dave's new band. The conflict caused by Dave's movie ambition and Ed's 5150 studio setup led to the split because Dave had contributed so much to building the band's success, and the split had to be managed fairly, and they couldn't just kick him out or fire him because he's a founding member. Kicking him out would have opened them up to a potential lawsuit. What do you think? Thanks for taking time to read this. Louise from London, UK. Well, geez, Louise, I love this letter. Yes, I have...
Geez, Louise, that was smooth. That was smooth.
Yeah. Yes, I have incredible suspicion in regards to the dissolving of Van Halen because it was too clean. The whole Dave went off to be movie star, then the whole Claudio thing, and Eddie and Sammy joined the band, then everybody lived happily ever after, I think is kind of bullshit. I think there's a lot of corporate strategy going on here behind the scenes that the public really doesn't know about. We always talk about the band personalities. That's what we focus on because that's what we know. We forget about the business end of things. These guys were all under contracts. There was all kinds of legal red tape that seems to have been dissipated. Personally, I think Ted was involved. Now, do I think Ted purposely broke up Van Halen? Absolutely not. I personally think Van Halen was falling apart at the height of their fame. Now, Ted and Don Landy were breaking up too as a duo and as an engineer and producer. They were breaking up as well. They barely got 1984 done. In fact, they missed the deadlines, pushing the release to 1984 in January. I believe Ted created this scenario to patchwork the band back together by keeping both of them under the Warner Brothers label and almost having two Van Halens for one. You got Dave's solo band and Van Halen with Sam, and noted Sam was his plan B in 1977. So when he made his call to Sam about Van Halen breaking up, I personally think there was something involved there. Do I think he was devious? No. I think he was trying to help the situation, help the band, help Dave. I think he was trying to keep both of them on the label, both of them making albums, touring, and, he successfully did that. Now, how is it that everybody stayed under the Warner Brothers label, releasing albums just months after each other? If you look at it, it's kind of unbelievable. Every Van Halen album and every David Lee Roth album are released months from each other, with the exception of Balance. But the reason why is Balance was delayed. Balance was supposed to come out in 1994. 5150 came out, then Eat 'Em and Smile came out a few months later. Skyscraper came out, then OU 812 came out a few months later. A Little Ain't Enough came out, and then For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge came out a few months later. And then Your Filthy Little Mouth came out, and then Balance got moved to the very early part of 1995. Either way, they were all within months of each other. There wasn't even a year between Your Filthy Little Mouth and Balance. They're all within months of each other. This way, if Van Halen reunited, they would still be under Warner Brothers. I think that was sort of the plan there. Dave, what do you think of this?
Well, I agree with you in that I think it's certainly plausible that once Ted realized the band was breaking up, he was going to do everything to keep the both of them on the same label. And really, Dave was very friendly with Ted at the time, so I don't think it would have been a stretch for him to say, hey, listen, I have a solo career now. Can I stay on the label? And, I'm sure Ted was like, let me think about that. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It avoids Dave the headache of shopping for labels. I agree with you that, usually when a band member leaves, they go to a different label, so it is somewhat unusual. But yes, the label did take great pains to space things out. I mean, I also think it was also a function of when each band was ready to release stuff. I think Van Halen was ready to go in early 86, and Dave thought he was going to have his movie. And then when the movie deal fell through, he had to scramble and get an album out. As to Luis's letter to us, in that, isn't it peculiar that everybody, or that not everybody, but a lot of people signed up with Dave? I'm not that surprised, actually. I don't know how much help there was from Warner Brothers with that, because Van Halen was their own organization. I really think people saw the writing on the wall, and when Dave was like, listen, here's what I'm doing, I have a plan, you want to come along, they all came aboard. because Dave was going places.
Dave had work.
Yeah. It was either for the movie or, he was probably going to, even though he had the movie, he still had the music career. Dave understood the business side of things. So who are you going to go with? The person who understands the business side of things or the people who are not so inclined to do that? And like you said, that's where you go where the work is. I mean, when you're in that kind of career and you're a tech or you're a roadie or you're the lighting guy or whatever, you're not waiting around for Van Halen to figure out who their lead singer is going to be.
Right.
And all that. Dave had a plan. So I don't know if this was a concerted effort by Warner Brothers to say, okay, we're going to take the whole infrastructure, the whole payroll or most of it and move it over to David Lee Roth. I don't think it was that calculated. I think a lot of people were loyal to Dave and they were like you said, I'm going where I can find work. Because really by that time, Van Halen picking a lead singer was like a big question mark. And the band is notoriously private. So people working for the organization probably had no idea, like Louise pointed out. I mean, they got a new lead singer and there wasn't even a press conference or an announcement or anything. I mean, it was like this little sidebar write-up in Rolling Stone for crying out loud.
At the bottom of a sidebar. It was It couldn't have been buried more. I mean, it was really unbelievable.
Exactly. So I see where Louise is going with this. And I know, Dave, you can't resist a little conspiracy theory when it comes to Van Halen in this era of the band. But I don't think it was as calculated as that. Although it is interesting. I'd be very curious, if anyone ever found any paperwork, how much Warner Brothers was involved once they realized the band was breaking up and how early did they act, what actions did they take, and things like that.
And also, let's not forget what she brought up also, is that he's a founding member of the band. He doesn't just vacate and that's it. He owns stake in the band and it must have been all been smoothed over. Possibly it could have been like, Dave, listen, we'll support you. We can move people here. We can get everything for you. Here's the other thing. I think Ted knew that Dave would need a hand as a producer. I think he knew Ed would be fine. Ed basically produced the 1984 album with Don Landy. He had Don Landy. He had 5150. He had the know-how in the studio. They could get new roadies. They could get a manager. They could get a crew team together. That's not that big a deal. And I think Dave was moving faster. And remember, like you said, Dave, his movie contract got messed up. But he was still making Eat 'Em and Smile. It was supposed to be the soundtrack to the movie. So those songs weren't just like rushed and made. They were all for the movie. But the movie didn't happen. So they changed it around to make it an album. But then I think the delay was booking the tour. So they had to make the tour on top of that. So I think that's what happened. And, if you think about it, he kind of switched everything around pretty quickly and got it out in a short period of time, considering the fiasco that he dealt with. And it's actually shocking that VH got that album out as fast as they did, and it was late. Believe it or not, it was considered to be late. Considering that Sam joined the band in July of 1985, and by March, they had the album out. Now remember, Gary basically joined the band in 1996 in the fall, like say officially October, right? Or whatever. It was probably before that. Their album didn't come out until March 17th of 1998. I mean, that's a long ways. That's a really long ways to go, but...
Right. But you got to remember, back then, Van Halen was putting out albums a lot quicker.
Right. That's true,
So, I mean, the fact that 5150 came out a couple of years after 1984 is pretty impressive, considering they had to do the whole lead singer switcheroony thing.
Right. Gary was in the band in part of 1996, all of 97, all of 98, and almost all of 99. It was a long time to be in the band, and he only did one album. And stuff like that is really interesting if you think about it. But on to letter number 3, which comes from Frustrated Florida Marcus Brixa. Oh boy. So he says here, Florida Marcus here, it's been a while since I wrote in, but rest assured I'm always listening intently, and this is my favorite podcast. I love the recent podcast with the Van Halen 1984 documentary, and thankfully I watched the first 2 episodes, and they were fantastic. After listening to the podcast, I started to watch them again, and to my absolute absolute horror, they were gone. What the fuck? I am dying to see the rest of this documentary. So much love and effort went into this project, and fans need to be able to see it. I can only assume that Van Halen or YouTube decided to take it down, and I truly think they hate us and care nothing about the Van Halen legacy. Van Halen has been my favorite band since 1982, and I have seen every tour since 1986. I have purchased everything they have put out, including the new Live Right Here, Right Now vinyl. Why did they take this down? I have never seen a band undermine their history, legacy, and respect for their fans as much as these guys. Most importantly, is it possible for us fans to find another way to see the documentary and support the efforts of Alan Berry? His Steve I doc was amazing, and I really want to see the Van Halen doc. Frustrated, Florida, Marcus Brixa. Well, Marcus, yes, I feel your pain. Alan did an incredible job on this documentary series. I truly hope the episodes come out in some form in the future, but that's up to him. I actually spoke to him this morning. He is working on a workaround, so I think that is going to happen. Why did they take it down? Because Warner Brothers was kind of flagging it for the copyrights on the original Van Halen music that was utilized in it. That was the problem. It's a complicated situation. It's also very frustrating for the fans because Alan's intent was strictly to do this for the fans. He's not trying to monetize it. I believe you'll see it at some point. I really do. But honestly, are you really surprised? They have that kind of control thing. So what do you think, Dan?
So I know we covered this in the news section already,
right.
But yes, we're crossing our fingers and hoping for the best that it comes out in whatever form it comes out. I know Alan is spending more time on this than he thought he would. And we don't know, as of this recording, we still don't know the whole story. Apparently it's quite a story, according to Alan, which of course doesn't shock any of us who've been a Van Halen fan to know that there's a lot of drama behind it. But fingers crossed that it comes out, because Dave and I did see the preview and it is worth seeing. And if you did see the first 2 episodes, that gives you a taste. But I do agree that this band does tend to undermine itself when it comes to its legacy, does not do its fans any favors. And I'm not suggesting that fans go out and do whatever they want with the band's music. The band should be paid appropriately when parties use their music. But if something is done out of love for the band and there's no desire to monetize it, I mean, come on, give us a break. Especially when there's nothing else out there formally provided by the band.
Hey, let me tell you something. Alan told them, monetize it and take the money. He actually said that to them.
Right. Yeah, he put it on. He's like, I don't want to make any money. Here, take the money. Don't care. Just want it out there. And that has been his mantra since day one. Doesn't want to make a dime, just wants to put it out there for the fans. But there's been some, I don't even know what you call it, from band members. There's been, I don't know what you want to call it, apparently from Warner Brothers. So who the heck knows? It turned into this mess. I feel for Alan. He really wants it out there, so he's trying his hardest. I give the guy a lot of credit for the video and for the BS he's putting up after it. So hang tight. Hopefully we'll see something soon. If we get any other updates, we promise we'll let everybody know.
Unfortunately, this is also going to prevent him from doing any more Van Halen stuff.
No, of course. Yeah. Like after this, he's like, I'm not touching this band with a 10-foot pole.
Exactly.
I mean, Steve Vai sent him a guitar as a thank you.
With a thank you written on it.
Right, exactly. Like autographed thank you on the guitar. What did Van Halen and or their record company or whomever send him? Effectively, they sent him a cease and desist.
And he also did one on Black Sabbath, who is another Warner Brothers artist and has never given him a problem.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Sometimes you're better off just releasing these things and letting people find out on their own and it's sneaking under the radar and not making a big deal about it. But like everything in Van Halen land, everything has to turn into a big Megillah.
Of course.
So when Wolf talks about why the band isn't reuniting for a tribute for Ed, I get it. You can't take one step forward without taking 3 steps back. And it's frustrating as all get out. But I digress.
Yeah, well, that's the truth. And, he's right in the center of it, and he doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. What the hell does that tell you? It says it all, actually. Letter number 4 comes from Dave from Maryland. He says, quick question regarding Sammy Hagar and the release of the Unboxed record. As you stated before, Sammy was contractually obligated to release a greatest hits album for his record label when he joined Van Halen. First, why wasn't the greatest hits album released with I Never Said Goodbye? Moreover, I remember remember reading in Sam's autobiography that he released the Unboxed album in order to help pay for his divorce. If that was the case, couldn't he have said to the other guys in the band, hey, my ex is taking me to the cleaners in this divorce, so I'm releasing this to help me a bit. If it is true that he helped use this to pay off his debts, why am I not surprised that he couldn't be more forthcoming with the guys in VH? However, as someone who is going through a divorce currently, I can understand the need for some privacy. Thanks. Love the show, Dave from Maryland. Well, Dave, I'm sorry to hear about your divorce. That sucks, and I hope you're okay. So, regarding the situation, here's the scoop. Now, in Sam's defense, the band was fully aware about the greatest hits because it was part of the deal that Van Halen's manager, Ed Loeffler, made to get Sam out of his contract with Geffen and into Van Halen. Remember, Sam was doing well on Geffen Records. He had Standing Hampton, 3 Lockbox, VOA. He still owed them albums on his contract. So, in order to get him out of his Geffen deal, onto Warner Brothers and in Van Halen, they had to do a deal with David Geffen, and part of the deal was, and it was pretty hefty, Sam owed them an original solo album, which was I Never Say Goodbye. He also owed them a Greatest Hits album, and they got part of the profits of 5150. So you have to realize, if you're going to pull someone out of a contract like that, it has to be lucrative for the company that has him under contract, and that's what happened there. Now, Ed ended up producing the album, I Never Say Goodbye, played bass on it to remain involved. Now, the reason Sammy didn't put out the Greatest Hits until later is because they wanted to include the singles from I Never Said Goodbye on there. By the way, the worst album title in the world. And also, it stretched out the releases. Now, what happened was the timing was bad because Van Halen did 5150, then they toured for 5150. Then they went right into making I Never Said Goodbye, doing a little press on that, going right into making OU812, going right into the Monsters of Rock tour, going right into the OU812 tour, and then Sam was having issues at home with his wife Betsy, and then they were making the Fuck album, and then they went and toured extensively for that, went right into the Live Right Here Right Now album, and toured behind that. Then at this point, Ed Loeffler gets sick, and it was this time that Geffen's kind of like, where's the greatest hits? Because it's been years. So Sammy had to do the greatest hits. He did 2 extra songs to make extra money with it. Personally, I don't know how he got away with just giving Betsy the money he made for the 2 new songs off the greatest hits. That seems really weird, considering he had a lot more money than that, and she was like his wife from the beginning, like even before he was wealthy. So I have no idea about that or how that worked, but that was kind of strange. But it's not like the band didn't know about it. They knew full well about it because it was part of the contract. Now, did they like it? No, they didn't like it. And, you know, they wish Sammy didn't have any involvement. But let's remember this, though. In Sammy's contract, he had it in his contract that he could make a solo album after every Van Halen album, and he never utilized that. But that was in his contract. And don't forget, he did that song Winner Takes It All off the Over the Top soundtrack. He also did that as a solo project. So it was 3 solo projects going on all at that same time. So it was really pretty wild. What do you think of this, Dave?
I think it's an interesting time in Sam's history and Van Halen history. I don't think the Greatest Hits album was released at the time of I Never Said Goodbye because they didn't need to release a Greatest Hits with it. I mean, there was enough interest in Sam at that time that they were just going to release a studio album. And by the way, let's clear the air. The only reason you think that's the worst album title is because there was a contest, and to this day, you are still bitter that they didn't pick your name and your suggestion as the winner.
And let's be honest, I'm going to tell you, do you remember my title?
You won't let me forget.
Well, don't you think it was better than I Never Said Goodbye?
I don't think it's any better or any worse.
That is really a shitty comment because it was 10 times better. My title was Back in the Red, which made sense because he was the Red Rocker and he was back in the red by getting into his solo career. And I thought that was a perfect title. When I wrote that postcard and sent it to MTV, I really believed I was going to win.
I'm not saying it was a bad idea. I'm just saying the judges picked something else. And the winner was also from Long Island.
Enough to burn my ass.
Well, what can I tell you? But anyway, So that's why the greatest hits wasn't released at the time. They didn't need to. And so years later, they're releasing a greatest hits. They really want Sam to be involved and put new songs on there. They're willing to pay him a lot of money to do it. He really needs the money for his divorce. I certainly don't know the details of his divorce, but I think what he needed some cash on hand.
Yeah.
And this was an easy way for him to get cash on hand. And so that was the deal. I'm sure the band knew about it. I don't think Sam was doing anything behind their backs. I know they weren't crazy about it because the timing of it was right after Ed Loeffler passed away.
Right.
And so now here's Sam doing a greatest hits, so they weren't crazy about it. But that was the timing. That's what was going on in Sam's life. So that's the story behind the Unboxed record, which even as a greatest hits, it's okay, but it's not great. It's missing some songs from the Geffen years.
Oh, totally. It's very lackadaisical. Although I have to say, High Hopes is a great song.
Oh, no, I like High Hopes, and the other song on it, whose name escapes me right now.
Buying My Way into Heaven.
There you go. I mean, that one wasn't that bad either. You know, as far as Sam's songs, they were pretty good. And, I mean, Sam actually did some promotion for that album, too, which I think was part of the deal. But that was around the time the brothers started getting annoyed and looked at Sam as a solo artist. And this was just like another nail in the inevitable coffin of Sam leaving the band. At least, you know, in retrospect. Hindsight is always 2020.
This is also when Cabo Wabo was taken off.
Right, exactly.
Right, so a lot of salt in the wound.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Letter number 5 comes from your favorite, Dave, Vegas Paul Davis. And he says here, wrote a couple letters in here. I will shorten them. He says, I love the story about when Dave helped Sam and gave him advice about the word ass in I Can't Drive 55. I went back and watched the trial scene, and the judge uses the guillotine to chop a cigar, and I figured that's the sound they would use to cover up the forbidden word. But it isn't. At 2 minutes and 28 seconds, they just mute Sam's vocal. I hope you can have Nuno on the pod because I think 6, the Extreme record, is the album of the year. He also said, I recently heard the demo tracks from the 5150 sessions and they're nearly finished, but they're different from the album tracks. Question, how does the band put a song together? How is it written and arranged? What's the process that it goes through, the different iteration with background vocals? When does the producer get involved? I really have no idea. I figured you guys would know. Van Hagar is the perfect term for describing Sam's time in the band, but I think the fans would have rejected the name in 1985. Still, Van Halen, it was a strong name and it worked. No videos, in my opinion. It was crazy, but the cover for 5150 is the top 3 of Van Halen covers, along with Van Halen 1 and 1984. He said that he thinks the picture of the 4 members in the straitjackets would have made a better back cover because the picture of Eddie above the egg looks absolutely too passive and Alex looks like the Terminator. He also said, Dave and I are the only ones who raced out to buy the first single from OU812, which was Black and Blue. We both thought the same thing. What the hell is this? Totally agree. Mine, All Mine would have been a great lead single. Vegas Paul Davis. Well, Vegas Paul Davis, yes, the Sam video story is a great one. I think those editing decisions were made by the censors. I think it's a quick, cheap fix by muting the vocal. I think that's a lame way to do it.
I agree with you. It's just like a quick and easy way to edit the video. Yeah. I don't think the video is any better or any worse.
No.
Either way they go. I mean, the video's kind of corny to begin with.
Oh, God, yeah.
Even by 80s standards, quite frankly.
My favorite is when he runs up the wall.
Oh, yeah. That's some big stunt doubling going on there.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd love to have Nuno on the pod. I will definitely try to do that. I would also love to have Gary on the pod. I will try to do that.
Oh, yeah, either one of them.
Oh,
I mean, we could talk to Nuno for hours on the Van Halen influence.
It.
You know, we'd love to talk to him about his new album. He's a very interesting guy.
Yeah, he really is. He's a genius. He really is a genius.
He is. He's very underrated.
Yeah, totally. In the demo tracks, this is kind of how I have read this works in Van Halen. Every band is different. A song is typically made in Van Halen, and believe it or not, Dave and Sam worked the same way, although obviously they had different talents. So apparently, Ed would come up with all kinds of pieces of songs. He wouldn't have a whole song. He'd have pieces like a riff, a hook, something, and Dave and Sam would sift through all of Ed's pieces and they would figure out which ones they were attracted to, which they could write a lyric to, hook a melody onto that. Then they would take that raw form and bring it into the studio. They'd kick it around with the band, Alex and Mike, and they kind of, put it together a little bit. Now, it's always in a rough sort of shape. Then the producer really comes in and makes the nip and tucks there. Makes them suggestions on certain things. Maybe they change a little lyric thing here and there. Like, everything kind of gets shaped. That's how they typically did it in Van Halen. And believe it or not, very similar to Dave or Sam. Even though Dave and Sam write very differently, they had a similar, I guess, pattern of which the band wrote.
Yeah, that's just the way it worked for the band. Certainly with Dave and Sam, Ed would write the music and the other two guys would come up with the words and the melody, and it would work that way. Apparently with Gary, it worked that way too, although apparently Ed was inspired by some of Gary's lyrics to write songs.
Yeah.
But, I mean, me personally, I don't think that worked out too well.
No.
But that's just one person's opinion, although I think a lot of people support that view, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But, it works different ways for different bands. One person may throw in an idea and the others contribute, or, everyone does their part and throws in little parts of the song or whatever. Different strokes for different folks. It works different ways for different bands. But with Van Halen, Ed always said this himself. He was always pretty emphatic that he wrote the music of the band. And that's just how it worked with Van Halen.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of the Van Hagar name, I agree. It probably wouldn't have been swallowed well by the fans. In fact, if it was called Van Hagar, it might have been viewed as some sort of side project, like Hassas or something. It might not had the prominence that Van Halen had. And I think they sort of followed in AC/DC's footsteps when AC/DC replaced Bon Scott. Of course, Bon Scott passed away, but still, they were able to come back with a strong album like Back in Black, which is their biggest album, and then continue forward. But not like AC/DC. They kind of went in a different direction. Obviously, they had a different singer with different lyrics, different melodies, and Eddie was definitely writing in a totally different way. So that's all right. It worked out well. They ended up getting a strong album. But I do want to make a comment about the 5150 cover. So I think it's one of the best covers, too. Personally, I think Van Halen, for the most part, does not have great covers. They're just not known for having great covers. Yes, I agree. 5150 is one of the better ones, for sure. And you know what? It's interesting because really the album was supposed to be called Best of Both Worlds, which I personally think would have been a better title. Not that I don't like 5150, but 5150 is a million things. It's a guitar, it's an amp, it's a studio, it's like there's so many different elements to it. So to name the album 5150 might have been a little, I don't know, whatever, but it's okay, it's fine. I think the cover actually matches the title Best of Both Worlds in a way. So like this guy is holding up what is essentially the new Van Halen, and it's too much for him and it cracks and Van Halen opens up. I like the concept, and I think everybody's picture looks great, except Ed looks ridiculous. I think Al looks cool, Sam looks cool, and Mike looks fine, but Ed doesn't look like Ed. I mean, they put too much makeup on him, they puffed his hair up, it was kind of weird. What do you think, Dave?
His wardrobe is horrible.
Oh my God.
Ed never gave a crap about wardrobe and stuff like that.
Right.
But it's like he showed up in a tank top, and they were like, Ed, we're taking album cover pictures. Can someone get an overcoat for Ed, please?
I know.
This is not, no, we're not doing this. Right? And they stick like an overcoat on him to make him look like halfway decent, So I'm not crazy about that picture either for that reason. I know they were probably like, look, we're not dressing up anymore because, Dave's not around, so we don't have to dress up. It's kind of like, well, come on, man, like do something for the album cover. I always thought that was a cool album cover.
Yeah, definitely, sure.
Would they go by Van Hagar at that time? If you want the most bang for your buck, you are going to keep the band
Absolutely.
name.
Absolutely.
And yes, I know that Ed wanted to keep it because that was his last name, so there's that extra wrinkle.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, you're going to keep the band name because that's what people know. That's what they're going to look for. Van Hagar, the only reason that gets mentioned is because it's so easy to change the name that way for Van Halen. It's just a really convenient moniker to switch over.
Right.
But certainly nobody in the band wanted them to do that. I mean, interestingly, the record company wanted them to change the name.
I think because they wanted to keep the Van Halen name. They really all thought Dave was coming back. I mean, they really did. Ted was convinced. It's in his book. He really thought they were all going to get back together. Like, all right, you get the album out of your system with Sam. And, like, that's why they wanted to keep that Van Halen name. You got to remember, the name Van Halen, although it's Ed and Al's name, was very synonymous with Dave's face. So you have to realize Dave was the face of the band. He was the voice of the band. Like, Christ's sake, when they started out, people were calling Dave Van. And the funny thing about the whole thing is Dave named the band Van Halen. That's what's hysterical. I mean, it's just kind of funny. It's insane. Anyway, also, last thing on Vegas Paul Davis, Black and Blue. Yeah, weird single to lead off with. I love the song. I just don't think it's the lead single. I don't know who picked that. It is bizarre. It is a long song to put out as a single and sort of a draggy, bluesy tune, which I love the tune, but it's not lead single material. I would have gone with Mine All Mine. What do you think, Dave?
Well, I'm not a huge fan of that album anyway. Like I said before, I missed that song completely when it was released as a single. I think it's a good album track. And like the trajectory Van Halen was on was they were releasing keyboardy songs, you know, even going back to 5150. You know, a lot of the singles were the keyboard songs. So that was the way they're headed. So now they released this guitar-oriented song to say, hey, look, we're still a tough rock and roll band.
I know.
But in the top 40, that's really not going to serve you well, and the lyrics are a little risque, so is top 40 radio really going to play them, and all that jazz. So I'm not sure what the thought process was behind that first single. Right. But luckily, they recovered quickly with When It's Love, because really, they could have tanked completely, because there's other artists out there. If that first song doesn't do well, then the album just tanks. The record company doesn't support the album anymore, and you're done. So Van Halen, again, they lucked out. These guys, it must be that good, because after you crap out with a lousy first single, you come back with a great second single.
Right. Letter number 6 comes from Brandon Wall, a.k.a. Chocolate Slim. And he says, I want to ask you guys something. During Van Halen's 1984 album and tour cycle, was there any serious talks about putting together a behind-the-scenes home video during this period? Reason why I ask is because there has been a bunch of video behind-the-scenes footage making of Jump and Panama music videos. Also, the footage of Michael Anthony drinking whiskey in the pool, as well as being in some soundstage with a gorilla and a big mouse. Also, the footage of Dave being escorted with 2 women outside a hotel or a fancy restaurant, as well as being in bed when he has a pretty maid cleaning his room while he's on the phone. He also wanted to ask that Alan Berry mentioned Fair Warning and stated that So This Is Love and Sunday Afternoon in the Park were keyboard synthesizer songs. So This Is Love is not. It's One Foot Out the Door as well as Sunday Afternoon in the Park. Question number 2 for Alan is Alan mentioned about Van Halen mixing and editing their performance of the US Festival. Were they seriously consider releasing a live album or home video on the US Festival? What's the truth on that? Thanks, stay frosty, Brandon Wall, a.k.a. Chocolate Slim. Brandon, thanks so much for listening, and you're a longtime listener. We appreciate your support. No, there was no home video or rockumentary planned for that footage. That was all for MTV video purposes. They originally shot all this crazy sort of things for each guy for the video for Jump, which ended up being used and interspliced into Panama. Yes, online, there's tons of B-roll on that. Definitely not for a home video. That was not a Van Halen style. And also, the home video thing didn't get bigger until later in the 80s, like when Kiss did Exposed and all that stuff. Those are all kinds of crazy scenarios that Dave concocted to stuff into the video.
Right. No. I agree with you 100%. There was no way that Van Halen was going to be releasing any kind of video for that. That was never in the cards. First of all, the band was splintering, so they weren't even thinking about that. Yeah. But even if they weren't splintering, they didn't release a live audio album. You think they're going to come out with a live video?
No.
I mean, to be fair, they did in 1986 with Sam.
Yeah.
But there was some new blood in the band.
It was the management who did that. The management, they had new management. It was a smart move. I thought that was
right. Well, and they hadn't released any videos either. So I think at that point, the record company or even MTV was like, guys, you got to do something. Come on.
And those things were big then. By 1986, those home video things were huge. And also, Brandon, you can watch all of that footage. It's endless on YouTube with Dave and Mike and Alan. And it's all B-roll. It's kind of boring after a while. After you see 5 minutes of it, it's like it's the same thing over and over again. But all of that stuff is on YouTube, so you can check that out. Regarding the questions for Alan, I have to ask Alan, did he mix up So This Is Love and One Foot Out the Door? That could easily have been a mistake. I can answer the question regarding the US Festival. Yes, it was mixed and edited, but not for a home release, for Showtime. The US Festival was presented on Showtime, but not for a home video or live album. But it did air on Showtime back in the day. So that's what the mixing and editing was about. Dave, what do you have to say?
Right, because I think they were showing 3 songs on Showtime, and I think they also were doing 3 songs as like part of a radio show that was doing like a very condensed version of the US Festival. Like they used to do live radio shows, and they would syndicate them out to all the radio stations. There was part of that too.
Yeah.
There was never any plans to do a full-on Van Halen release for it. In fact, to this day, sadly, I think Van Halen is the only band, or one of the few bands, that has not done an US Festival release.
I know.
In one way or the other.
Yeah.
And regarding the keyboard songs from Fair Warning, I think Alan had said it wasn't his goal to like name every single keyboard-oriented song during his video, but regarding the question of whether there were keyboards or not in Is This Love, believe it or not, there are.
Oh, okay.
Because if you go on YouTube and you Google Is This Love Van Halen keyboards, somebody extracted the keyboard portion of the song.
Okay.
And I didn't even realize this until like a month ago. I had no idea there were keyboards on the song.
Wow.
Now, in the final version, they're buried in the mix.
Yeah.
Very hard to hear, if at all.
Right.
But I think somebody ripped this from the Van Halen video game that was out there.
Jeez.
Yeah, I forget which one it was.
Probably
but anyway, you're able to separate certain instruments. So, yeah, believe it or not, there are keyboards on Is This Love.
So This Is Love.
So This Is Love. Sorry.
Right.
So
That's okay. That's okay.
So you're absolutely right on the songs we know that most fans know have keyboards, but believe it or not, that one does too. So, go figure.
Letter number 7 comes from Lane Spencer from San Diego, California. He says, hi, Dave and Dave. There is an awesome documentary on Amazon Prime called The Original Charvel Gang. It's about Charvel guitars and how Eddie Van Halen put their guitars on the map. There are cool stories about Eddie hanging out at the guitar shop and how they pissed Eddie off. There are interviews with Michael Anthony and his bass tech, Doogie. Charvel made the famous Jack Daniels bass, and I highly recommend it. Charvel guitars were a big deal in the 80s, and Eddie had a lot to do with it. Thanks, Lane Spencer from San Diego, California. Thank you for the heads up, Lane. We will definitely check that out. Dave, have you seen that?
No, I haven't, but thank you for the tip.
I totally want to see that. Letter number 8 comes from Jeff B., and he's from South Glens Falls in New York. And he says, is it me, or does Pound Cake and the Seventh Seal sound musically the same? The intro with Pound Cake has Ed with the drill, and the Seventh Seal has the monks chanting, obviously. This is different. But both have Alex kicking in with his kick-ass drums. Number 2, 2 other songs seem similar in a way to me as well. Take Me Back, Deja Vu from the Balance album, and Josephina from Van Halen 3. To me, Ed's acoustic guitar playing, my apologies, I'm not a musician, but which might not be acoustic in the beginning of both songs, but it has a similar sound, and Sam and Gary singing of stressing the part Take Me Back, and it says, hey Josephina, can you shine a light? Both songs fade out at the end. Well, listen, let's put these two together. So I think there is a lot of similarities to Pound Cake and Seventh Seal in a way, in just the very part in the beginning. Let's hear Pound Cake. Now let's hear Seventh Seal. Now, Pound Cake is much more upbeat and has more of a swing to it. You can tell there's a difference in production there. Seventh Seal is a darker tone, a darker melody, and when Sam comes in to sing, it's totally different. But I see your point. Both are album openers. They open similarly, and Alex's drums are definitely way more forward and prominent on Pound Cake, and Ed's guitar sound is different. The band sounds happy and upbeat on Pound Cake and kind of darker and edgy on the Seventh Seal. Now, Take Me Back is more upbeat and lighthearted, and I get what you're saying, though, about the acoustic guitar intro. Here's a clip of Take Me Back, Deja Vu. Now here's a clip of the opening of Josephina. Now, they do have a similar intro, for sure, I agree with you there, although Josephina sounds like a darker poem that Gary wrote for his mom that Eddie put music to. The bottom line is, this song shouldn't have even been on the album, to be honest with you. Nothing wrong with the song, it just didn't really fit. Dave, what do you think of this situation?
I see where he's coming from, and that the songs are similar in nature and approach, but I'm not hearing what he's hearing in that. I think he thinks they're more alike than I do. There's some acoustic approaches that are the same, or electric approaches that are the same, but I don't think they're overly similar. I'll give an example of what I see as more of a too close of a similarity is the intro to Why Can't This Be Love?
Oh, yeah.
And the intro to Up for Breakfast.
Oh, my God.
That's practically the same.
They're ripping themselves off.
Right, that's a little too close to home.
Yeah.
But the other songs you mentioned, I see where you're coming from, like, oh, they want a rocker that kind of works like this, or they want an acoustic song that works like that.
Right.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, but I don't think they're as similar as you do. But I respect your point of view, and I see where you're coming from.
Letter number 9 comes from Big Bad Bill from Boston. He says, I was listening to your podcast and heard you mention that the 1984 Monsters of Rock concerts were held before the Hot for Teacher video shoot. So does this mean the last time the original Van Halen performed together was in that video? Are there other evidence of this happening in Van Halen history between the Van Halen Hot for Teacher shoot and the breakup? If not, that's a hell of a way to go out. Keep up the great work. Big Bad Bill from Boston. Well, Hot for Teacher single, believe it or not, came out late. It was like October 27th of 1984. It hit 56 on the charts. It was shot at John Marshall High School in Los Angeles, California, when they got back from the Monsters of Rock in Nuremberg, Germany, September 2nd, 1984. It must have been a quick turnaround on that video. But back in the day, they did quick stuff, man. That's how that worked back then. And it was probably their last, and Van Halen at their best in terms of video, for sure. I mean, that was like really quite a way to go out, I agree. So that was fireworks in the last 2 minutes of the display. What did you think, Dave?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we can make a case that that was Van Halen's one of the last real things they did as a band, you know, whether it's live performance or video or appearance or anything. I never thought about the chronology before, but yeah, I guess, you know, they performed live. I think it was in Germany for the last time, and then they convened to do the video, and then after that, it was the beginning of the end set.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
So, yeah, I guess the Hot for Teachers video was one of the last things they did, interestingly enough. So, yeah, great observation on your part. Thanks for writing in about that.
Letter number 10 comes from Ricky Chan from Seattle. He says, I enjoyed the last podcast as usual. It was interesting to hear how Diver Down was a transition album for Van Halen in the 80s and how it paved the way for the masterpiece of 1984. But Diver Down is often criticized for having too many cover songs and being too short. What if they used original songs like She's the Woman or Bullet Head or even Honolulu Baby, my favorite unreleased song? Are they too 70s sounding? Would Ed have felt the need to build 5150 had he had more creative freedom on Diver Diver Down. Ricky Chan from Seattle. Well, Ricky, thanks for writing in. Regardless of Diver Down having more covers or more originals, I truly believe that Ed was growing and advancing as a musician rapidly, and therefore his expansion to 5150, having more of a hand in production, and all of that stuff was going to happen either way. He was bound to have his own studio, do his own producing. He was outgrowing Ted at the time. In terms of those songs, they might have been a little out of the way 70s. I'm sure if they were worked up properly, especially She's the Woman could have worked. You never know. But, you know, Ed moves on. He always likes fresh stuff. Sometimes he digs back and pulls out an oldie. But, you know, I don't think those were going to fit. You have to remember, they're entering into the 80s. It was such a different time than the 70s. And Van Halen was leading the charge of rock. Like I said, and I've said this before, Van Halen was a 70s rock band that became the bridge for rock from the 70s to the 80s. There was so many 70s rock bands. It was so gargantuan. Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, these big fucking bands, Aerosmith, and they had a hard time transitioning. It took Aerosmith a long time to transition over to the 80s. It wasn't until like 86, 87 until they really started to pop again, you know? Led Zeppelin obviously broke up to the death of John Bonham, and, you know, Black Sabbath struggled, to be honest with you. I mean, they had some good albums with Ronnie James Dio, but it really didn't soar the way they had it with Ozzy. But what do you think of this, Dave?
It's an interesting question. I think the band was under the gun at the time. If they had more time to do the album and more time to do original songs and flesh them out, would Ed have built the studio? You know, that's a great question because, you know, after that album, he was so disenchanted with the whole process and how albums were made. He's like, forget this. I'm building a studio so I can do what I want. And that's that. If he had been able to do what he wanted, maybe he wouldn't have built the studio. But then again, to your point, you know, maybe it was inevitable. It was just a question of when. At worst, I think it would have been delayed. But as far as using original songs, I think, you know, they just had to get the album out. So they didn't have like a lot of time to flesh out originals or go back to reinvigorate old ones. So they just did covers. I don't know if they're too 70s sounding or not. I just think it was the band's call and Ted's call about what was a good song or not. Because those songs just, you know, they never made the final cut at all during the original run for whatever reason.
Right. Letter number 11 comes from Dirty Face Kid, Greg Miner, and he says, I had a dream last night that I was in a room with David Lee Roth from the 1984 era. We were having a rational conversation, and he was answering all my questions. By the way, this is definitely a dream. And Sidekick Dave will appreciate that there wasn't any Bozy Bop. I even told him about your podcast, and he seemed interested in coming on the show. It got me wondering if you guys have ever had any interesting or weird dreams about Van Halen. My best Van Halen dream was the one where I was hanging out in 5150 Studios with the band, and we were partaking in some sort of illicit substances, hanging out and chatting and having fun. It was all a dream, but I wish it was really happening. Thanks, guys. Dirty Face Kid, Greg Miner. Well, I can tell you, I don't typically have a lot of Van Halen dreams, but I did have one that stressed me out, so I'll tell you about it. So when Van Halen mentioned that they were reuniting with Sam, which was somewhere on the early part of 2004, and I was anticipating the tour and what was going to happen and the best of both worlds and all that shit. So I had this really intense dream that Dave and I had tickets to a secret pre-show. Like before the tour, sometimes they'll do like a club show, and I don't know how, but we had the tickets, and we were walking to the fucking show. I don't know why, but it was like this dark road, and we're walking, and we were getting lost, and we were getting close to the time, and we could hear the band performing and taking the stage, and it was stressing me out, and this is why I hate these fucking dreams. I always have these like stress dreams when it comes to stuff like that. So that bothered me, and I'll tell you how I eliminate that, because I hate stress dreams. So what I do is when I go to sleep, I have earphones on and I listen to podcasts, and it makes me not have these stress dreams. But believe it or not, that's actually one that I remember. I used to wake up like sweating and like freaking out because I was so stressed out from the dreams, but I never had any other Van Halen dreams other than that. What about you, Dave?
That's like Spinal Tap to the nth degree.
It was ridiculous.
I usually don't remember my dreams, so I couldn't even tell you if I dreamed about Van Halen.
Most of Dave's dreams are wet.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. Here we go.
He doesn't remember what happened. He wakes up soaked.
You know, I have to tell you, like, we real life experiences with David Lee Roth that are kind of like dreamlike. When you tell the story out loud,
It's unbelievable.
Like, is this real or not?
Absolutely. That's fucking absolutely correct. Do you remember when we met him in the bathroom of the after party after his Filthy Little Mouth show in 1994 at the Academy? We saw him in the city. The venue doesn't even exist anymore. He played the Academy, and somehow I got passes to the after show. I'm trying to remember the name of the club that the after show was at.
I don't remember, but I do remember that it was like a bathroom.
Yeah.
Because we took a picture with Dave,
And
not in the bathroom.
Right.
But if you looked at the background wall, it looks like we're in a bathroom.
I know.
And actually, there's a picture of us, which I still have.
Yeah.
Because if you look in the background, if you look carefully, there's a urinal in the picture.
Yeah.
Because there's like an open door to the bathroom. So it really looks like we cornered Dave in the bedroom of this club and said, you're not leaving till you take a picture.
Yeah.
Which is not how it went down at all.
No.
That was one of those crazy nights.
That was nuts.
I remember Sebastian Bach was there.
Yep.
And that guy makes David Lee Roth look mellow.
I know.
I mean, let me tell you. First of all, he is tall.
Yeah, big dude.
So you meet Sebastian Bach, like you have to look up to talk to him. He's wild. He's crazy.
Well, he's got a mane of hair. He's so loud.
He was on 11.
Yeah,
he was cranked up to 11.
For sure.
And I just remember we were like, what is going on? Like, we did not fit in. Yeah, I don't know how we got into that place. It was a great David Lee Roth party. It was fantastic. And that was only the first time we met him, because we met him about 6 months later.
Yep.
Again. And that story is even wackier than the first one.
Yeah, well, we were at Malibu in Lido Beach, which is a small club. We saw him perform, and then we went to his bus.
Dave, that was almost your dream come true.
I know.
Because I remember we were like kind of sort of waiting backstage. We didn't see anybody, and you're like, come on, we're going backstage. And me, because, you know, I never break a rule in my life, I'm like, no, I don't think we should go back there. And you're like, come on, I've done this for years. I know how they play this game. So we keep going farther back and farther backstage, just so they remember we're there. And then we finally get behind the venue, and there's Dave's bus, and we're waiting with a bunch of people to meet Dave.
Right.
I'll never forget, there was this guy there.
Yeah.
He was an albino. I remember that.
Oh, God.
And he had the biggest doobie I've ever seen in my life.
Like Cheech and Chong style.
Oh, my. He was like offering us to smoke it, and we were like, no, that's okay. Because you got to remember, this definitely was not legal at the time.
That's right. Dave was fully prepared that he was going to have to blow Dave when he went on the bus.
Well, I was waiting my turn in line, because the reason we were waiting so long is because Dave was there with they were promoting ice beer at the time.
Yeah,
that was
oh my God, the Ice
thing.
Girls.
The Ice Girls. So, and I forget which beer it was.
I think it was Bud Ice.
No,
Michelob Ice?
Could have been. Honestly, I forget.
I don't even remember what that even means.
It was cold brewed instead of heat pasteurized is what it meant.
Christ.
But anyway, so one of the girls is on the bus with Dave, and they're, having a lovely conversation, I guess, or whatever they're doing. But meanwhile, the other Ice Girls, who all came in the same car, are banging on the bus door like, look, we need the key. This takes forever, but somehow one of the people from the bus comes out, gives the girls the keys. They leave without their friend.
Wow.
They leave, like, guess Dave will give you a ride home or whatever. Right? So we wait forever. We finally meet Dave. Yeah. He was the nicest guy.
He really was.
I know I make a lot of jokes about Dave, like Bozy bopping.
Yeah.
He was completely coherent.
It was amazing.
He was very nice. So Dave here brings everything under the sun for David Lee Roth to sign.
I'm a nightmare.
You had no shame.
No shame.
No shame.
I was young
like
and dumb.
Every Van Halen album, LP, vinyl, cassette. set, like CD.
I know.
Like, I had a ton of stuff. And I'm like, you got some big balls, son. And he signed everything.
He didn't
and I'm
care.
not talking like a quick Sammy Hagar, I'm in the middle of singing a song, I'm just going to whip this out. Like, he took his time.
I know.
And signed everything slowly and individually. And I just remember Dave was pretty coherent, but he had like that smile on him the whole time.
Yep.
And of course, the Ice Girl was right next to him, wrapped around his arm, and we were on his tour bus.
Yeah.
And it was very surreal, quite frankly.
That girl saved you. She saved you from blowing Dave.
She saved us both, quite frankly. So.
All right. Well, let's move on.
I know we went off on a tangent, but that's our dream come true.
Yeah, that is true. That was like a dream, but it actually did happen. That's true.
So I remember all that, but don't ask me what I had for breakfast.
Exactly. Letter number 12 comes from Mario Aguilera from Joliet, Illinois. And he says, I'm sure you guys talked about this before, but the song that Ed played guitar for Nicolette Larson, Can't Get Away From You, I saw someone post it on Facebook some years back. I would have never known, but it totally sounds like Ed. Now, I'm sure you guys know that Nicolette Larson's song, A Lot of Love, you can't get away from that song. I remember it so well as a kid, but sadly she passed in 97 at age 45. I saw the credits on her album, and shit, Ted Templeman produced it. I'm sure that's how Ed got involved. Love the show, can't wait for the next one. Mario Aguilera from Joliet, Illinois. Well, yes, it was a favorite of Ted, who was producing the album, and here is a clip of Ed performing his solo at 1 minute and 50 seconds in. Ed loved playing guitar on people's albums that he was a guest star on. He kind of enjoyed it. It was a kick because it really was no pressure. And he was obviously ridiculously talented. So he's appreciated, he's asked, and he went in, he did a favor. He did it for Michael Jackson, did it for Nicolette Larson, did it for Brian May, he did it for LL Cool J. And, people asked him and he showed up. He was totally into it. And Nicolette was at Ed and Val's wedding, believe it or not, in 1981 and served as a bridesmaid. How do you like that? A little known trivia there. What do you think there, Dave?
More than that, she sang at the wedding.
Wow.
Yeah, she sang, like a wedding song or something like that. So, yeah, it was a big deal. Sadly, she passed away like quite a few years ago.
I know.
But, yeah, she was a great singer, marvelous voice. She was part of that crew with Neil Young and that whole thing. She did a lot of background vocals, I think, on his Harvest album, if I'm remembering correctly. So, yeah, great singer.
Absolutely. Letter number 13 comes from Ron Bruck from New Jersey. And Ron, I had to cut you down because, my God, you went on. And Dave's going to have a heart attack, so I have to cut you down. He says, Sausage de Rock is not to be overlooked. 10 of the 13 songs rock and have remarkable guitar parts. If you haven't seen the video for King of Ladies, please check it out. It's easily their best video in 20 years. I do agree that their album covers kind of suck. Waiting for the Punchline is their high mark, and it's their fair warning. It's a darker, edgier album that ages like fine wine. I do love the new disc. I gave it several spins, but there are 4 or 5 skip-overs for me. I totally agree with Quiet Dave, and I'd rather have an album with a big finish. The last 2 songs didn't strike a chord with me. And he highly recommends some of the Nuno solo stuff like Mourning Widows, Population 1, and Drama Gods, as well as his Schizophrenic album. He also wanted to ask, did you ever happen to check out their show from Australia 2013? This is Van Halen now. Ed, Alan Wolf are all dressed just like Dave the entire show. The whole band is wearing black pants, white button-down shirt, and black vests. I freaking love this unified look, and the camaraderie was real and gave me such hope for the future. I always love a look of a band that's dressed alike. Keep up the amazing work. You guys are both my favorite thing to listen to and from work, and I'm the same age as both of you and have the same sickness. Talk soon, Ron Bruck from New Jersey. Well, Ron, time. I will give Sausage another listen. I disagree with you on 6. I think it's way better than you say it is, but it's all subjective, of course. Nuno's solo stuff is pretty good, but it's all over the place. It's a little scatterbrained, but I do believe he's a genius. Personally, I think Extreme wasted a lot of time. 6 albums in 38 years is kind of a ridiculous percentage, but whatever. They did come out with 6 good ones. So now, Van Halen in Australia, 2013, that's sort of a mystery. I think that was just a fun thing they did to all dress the same. I'd have to ask Wolf if we ever get in touch with him. Maybe he would answer a question like that because it's sort of a fun, quick question, but he doesn't like to discuss Van Halen stuff, so who the hell knows? What do you think, Dave?
That was done on purpose.
Oh, okay.
They were playing tribute to a famous Australian, I think it was like TV or movie character. I tried to look it up, but I couldn't find it. It was like a tribute to Han Solo or something like that.
I was going to say, they look like Han Solo, yeah.
They do, but no, there was an Australian character who dressed like that, and they did it that way on purpose as a tribute to that character. And I think that's the only time they ever did anything like that.
Yeah, that was weird.
But that's the method behind the madness. But I do agree with you that waiting for the punchline is their fair warning.
Yeah,
it
totally.
It is darker, it's a little rougher, and like I said before, I'm not a huge Extreme fan, but I love that album.
Yeah.
I just think they just knocked it out of the park, but sadly, not a lot of people know about it. And I just think, even if you're not an Extreme fan, that album is worth listening to. Sometimes the 90s and the grunge years brought out the best in bands and helped them get out of a habit where they just liked everything super polished to a high shine. And Extreme definitely did not take that route when they did that album. That album is definitely worth listening to.
Totally. Letter number 14 comes from Northwest fucking Han, Casey Alford. Hello, Dave and Dave. When are you guys ever going to give us your follow-up to Boomtown? You guys are infinitely more inactive than Van Halen ever was. Ironic, given you're complaining about the band. Yikes, that was horrible. Forgive me. Seriously, though, have you ever put together a chronological timeline of David Lee Roth's guitars, starting with his early band Red Bull Jet, through Mammoth, Van Halen, his EP sessions, solo albums and tours, Vegas shows, and various returns to and attempts reunion with Eddie, newer solo songs, etc. Every guitarist he's ever played with, all the way up to now. A tall order, I know, but if anyone can do it, you guys can. Cheers, Northwest fucking Han, Casey Alford. Okay, well, Northwest fucking Han. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about with Boomtown. A follow-up to Boomtown? Do you know what he's talking about?
No, I don't get that reference at all. Sorry.
I think he's mixing up with somebody else. No idea what you're talking about there. Also, infinitely more inactive than Van Halen. That's confusing, too, because we're around for 7 years. We've put out 1 episode a month. That's 12 episodes every year, so I don't know how that equates to being less inactive than Van Halen. I don't understand that. Now, you want a chronological timeline of guitarists? I got this for you, Mr. Hahn. You ready for this? Okay, it's not chronological, but Steve Vai was interviewed in episode 4 and episode 75. Jason Becker's interviewed in episode 61. We have Steve Hunter interviewed in episode 61. We have Terry Kilgore, episode 34. We have Rocket Richey in episode 18. We have John 5 in episode 44. We have Bart Walsh in episode 43. Rest in peace, Bart Walsh. And we have Brian Young in episode 53. So if that doesn't keep you busy, now the Eddie interview I still have coming up because that's in the vault and I have to pull that out, and we've already discussed that, but that is an extensive amount of Roth guitarists that we have spoken to, and if you want to chew on that, go look those up and listen to those episodes. What do you say, Dave?
I say you hit most of the guitarists right there.
Yeah.
As for a complete list, I know the guys at DLR Cast are fans of trying to figure out everybody David Lee Roth has ever played with for his solo career, which gets messy, certainly like around the 2020 time, because Dave was going through band members like underwear. And even in the mid-2000s, he was starting to switch out. So it gets a little crazy. But you had mentioned Rocket Richey, Dave, and I forgot that we actually spoke to him for a while we were waiting for Dave in 94, waiting to get on his tour bus.
That's right.
We actually spoke to him for a decent amount of time, and we learned he had played with the lead singer from the band that does Magic Carpet Ride, the guy who wears sunglasses all the time.
Oh, the guy from Steppenwolf, right?
Yes, Steppenwolf. Steppenwolf,
Okay,
the lead singer for Steppenwolf, John Kay or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
John Kay, yeah.
Yeah, played with him for a while. Really cool guy. And we had talked to him for like half an hour.
I remember you gave him a handy on the side of the bus.
I did. I still didn't get an autograph.
No, can you imagine? Oh, God. You must have done a shitty job.
I guess a little ain't enough.
Oh, I love how you brought that around. That's awesome. Letter number 15 comes from Eric Torbick, the perfect letter writer from New Jersey. And he says here, what's up, guys? The last episode you talked about the Tokyo 1989 show. Do we have any idea why they didn't just put out a proper video release? They apparently had a huge hand in producing the TV special, and considering that the band spent most of 89-90 out of the public eye, and live in Japan is the stereotypical and perfectly named 1989 VHS home video as we remember from the 80s. Eric Torbick, the perfect letter writer from New Jersey. Well, in Japan, they used to put these shows on television, right, Dave? So it was like for broadcast, hence the bootleg pro shot that everybody has.
Right.
But, you know, they just did live without a net. Therefore, I don't think they would have done another home video right after that. They waited until Live Right Here, Right Now to do that. Even Balance had a pay-per-view special that was supposed to have a DVD release, but Sammy left the band, and that went onto the shelf and into the vaults. Now, that's how you write a letter. 1, 2, 3. That's the master, Eric Torbick, perfect letter writer from New Jersey. Dave, what do you have to say?
I think you hit the nail right on the head with that one.
Yeah.
I don't think they were going to release something right after they had released something from the 86 tour. You know, it's always interesting that they had done a halfway decent amount of TV appearances, you know, almost full concerts in other countries, but never the United States. Now, certainly not at that time. But in Japan, they did like an hour's worth of the show was released. This is like another cool thing that would be great on the box set that we're never going to see.
Or, you know, you put out an expanded version of OU812. You put that on as a bonus disc.
Right. Even just the audio if you wanted to, but the video would be cool too.
Do it DVD with an audio bonus. I mean, you know, that's the way you do this shit.
Right. Absolutely.
Letter number 16 comes from Devon Miller. And Devon was cool enough to write in. He wrote in 2 letters. He was so excited. We'll have to edit it down. He says, there is a precedent for Sammy writing lyrics to a Van Halen song before Eddie gave him the music. The song Cabo Wabo, he wrote the lyrics thinking of the music and the drum beat, I believe, for the song Make It Last while he was on vacation in Cabo, San Lucas. And when he called Eddie to tell him about it, Eddie and Al had been working on music that was very similar to Make It Last. They love that. It's like one of their favorite Montrose songs. In fact, they used to play that in concert in 1986 on the 5150 tour. So is it possible that Sammy did have lyrics and a basic idea for the song High Hopes and Buying My Way Into Heaven, but Eddie wasn't inspired or couldn't come up with the music that he liked to match the vibe? He also wanted to know about Alex Van Halen as a songwriter. There are only 2 times I remember Eddie specifically calling out Alex as a participating creator of a song. Alex was key to the arrangement of Pleasure Dome, and Eddie had 3 different riffs that were unconnected, and Alex came in and strung them together to make a complete song. He talks about this in an interview during Balance. Eddie says a lot of times the inspiration starts with a drum beat. Ed always said that he writes all the music in every interview I've ever heard, and when someone asked him about making a solo album, he always said since he writes all the music for Van Halen, he can't imagine doing a solo album that sounded any different than a Van Halen album. Devon Miller. Look, it's possible the Cabo Wabo situation was an outlier, but Sam was not known for handing Ed music or lyrics. High Hopes and Buying My Way Into Heaven, I don't know. He could have had them lying around and saw what Ed thought, but, you know, Ed is not going to respond too well to, like, fully formed Sammy Hagar songs. I don't think so. Although I love High Hopes, and I would have loved to see Van Halen rip into that. That would have been a good version for them to do. Alex was always very notable on Pleasure Dome. That song really showcases Alex's incredible ability. I really believe that song should have been an instrumental, because if you ever saw the live version for Live Right Here Right Now, it's fantastic. That song lyrics is fucking horrendous. It really is so fucking bad. It hurts my ears to hear it. I mean, it's like Sam mumbling some sexual innuendo. It's just horrible. Musically, the song is amazing. It really came alive on Live Right Here, Right Now. What a really incredible way for Mike and Alex and Ed to just go off. But Ed definitely writes all the music. That's his calling card. So what do you say, Dave?
I totally agree with you about Pleasure Dome.
Yeah.
Lyrically, it was disappointing.
Oh.
So when they did it instrumentally as the intro to Al's solo, I was like, all right, That was awesome. I suppose these days, if you look hard enough on YouTube, you can find the instrumental of the studio version there and do it that way. Instrumentally, that was one of the better songs off for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge.
Totally. Letter number 7 comes from Southeast Kurt, and he won't even give me his last name anymore because he doesn't want me to say it. So he says here, I really enjoyed the June episode. It was a nice surprise that it dropped a few days early on June 20th. Thanks for the great track-by-track review of Extreme's new album, 6. I've been listening to it quite a bit, and I love how it comes out of the gate rocking hard. It also has a good balance of pop songs as well. It reminds me of classic Van Halen a little bit. Whatever Gary's doing to preserve his voice, he needs to keep doing it. Thanks for the interview with Steve Stevens. I saw him with Billy Idol in 2001, and I was very close to the stage, and he sent us some pictures. He said, keep up the good work as always. Much love from Atlanta. Your pal, Southeast Kurt. Please don't say it, Cribble. But let's be honest, his last name is Lawnco, isn't it?
I believe that's correct.
Okay, well, hopefully that's correct. We're going to move on because I don't want to upset him any more than I already have. Do you have anything to say to Kurt, Dave?
No, always good to hear from you. Glad you like the 6th album. We do too. It's pretty good. And yeah, I do have to agree with you that whatever Gary's doing vocally, he's still got it. Has not lost his touch. So it's really great to hear him sing so well.
And we can't let it go by without saying you got to listen to the Retro Zest podcast that's done by Southeast Kurt because he loves those plugs.
Was that the Retro Zest podcast?
That's the Retro Zest podcast by Southeast Kurt Lawnco. All right. We hope. Cross fingers. Letter number 18 comes from Jeff Shrewsbury, and he says, quick note, I noticed the lyric Save Me From Myself appeared a few times on a recent Extreme song called Save Me from the 6th album. I couldn't help but notice the same lyric stood out to me in the unreleased Van Halen song, That's Why I Love You. Probably has nothing to do with anything. Could have Gary have unwittingly or wittingly used an old lyric? Who knows, but it's interesting to me. Jeff Shrewsbury. Well, Jeff, singers often keep a book of lyrics. Even if it's a little fragment of a lyric, they'll bring it out or use it here and there. That's Why I Love You was not used officially, so Gary probably had that line in one of his books. I know Gary writes a lot in a book. I think David Lee Roth does this all the time too. He'll get like a little piece of a lyric and like it just sounds good to him or whatever, and he stores it away like a squirrel with a nut, and he never knows when he's going to pull it out. And you could see that on some of the old things David Lee Roth has done. Even in some unreleased Van Halen tracks, you might hear a line or something that ends up in another Van Halen song that actually was officially released many years later. So a lot of singers do that. They'll take half a sentence or a piece or a phrase, and sometimes they'll always go back to their book when they're writing a song and see what they can put together. So that's probably where that comes from. Dave, what do you have to say?
I don't think you're that far off. I think it was coincidence more than anything else.
Right. Letter number 19, the last letter of the night, Dave's absolute favorite, comes from Hunter Phillips. And Hunter says, Edward is on record stating that he never liked anything about Michael Anthony's playing, and here are 4 questions. If Ed was such a taskmaster, why did he tolerate what he characterized as almost a non-existent sound? Was it solely because of Mike's vocal talents? Number 2, what are your thoughts on the entirety of how Michael was treated? Number 3, what are your thoughts about Noel's comments regarding the aforementioned, and what are your thoughts about Noel's perspective on everything he spoke and wrote about with respect to the days with Van Halen and even post-David Lee Roth? And number 4, your opinion, is Ed a paradoxical and contradictory figure, and if so, to what degree? Hunter Phillips, Charlotte, North Carolina. Okay, well, number 1, I think Dave has said this before, and I'm going to reiterate it, but give him credit for it though. Ed really wanted Michael Anthony available 24/7, the way he had Alex available 24/7. I think he wanted him to be at the ready at all times. And if you remember when Gary was in the band, he loved Gary so much because Gary was living in the fucking guest house and he was pulling Gary out of bed to come work at any hour of the night, and that's the way Ed wanted to work. Michael Anthony, in my opinion, was not treated well. He was abused, if you think about it. Ed was hot and cold because he had a substance abuse problem. He had alcoholism, and it drastically affected his personality. So there's a little up and down there. Noel really had some interesting perspectives on Ed. Remember, he was on the road with them for 7 years, very intimately, so he knew those guys back and forward. Now, where I think Noel gets a little skewed is his post-Van Halen comments. I think there's a bitterness there. I think when he got fired, it really soured him on the band, understandably. But, his comments about Hagar and Sharon, it gets a little dicey. And I think you got to take that with a bucket of salt, not just a grain. But I do think that he knew the guys really, really well. And I think that his book, it's very eye-opening. And it tells you a lot about the personalities of the guys, especially at their young age and coming into stardom. And I think there's a lot to be taken there. But, of course, Noel being Noel, he kind of throws the barometer off because he's nuts himself. So, in my opinion, I think the stuff that he reports from the road are true, and then he goes off into tangents. What do you think, Dave?
I think regarding Michael Anthony, it boiled down to Mike was an original member of the band, and Ed valued loyalty a lot. Even though he had issues with Mike's playing or Mike not contributing any songs or any of that stuff, Mike was an original member of the band. He was with the band when they were nothing, and he was still with the band, and that counted a lot for Ed. That was the good news. I mean, the bad news is, when it came to like songwriting credits and stuff like that, they took that away from him, which is fine from one perspective because he didn't really write a lot if he wrote anything at all, but it's kind of mean to change the rules of the game in the middle of the game. But, to Mike's credit, there was no better gig than what he had, even though they were reducing his money. He liked playing with the band, quite frankly. They were great players, and he was fine with that. My impression of Mike has always been not much bothered him. Whenever people talk about Mike Anthony, they're always like, oh, I can't believe they treated him this way, that way, that. And I just think Mike let a lot of that stuff roll off of him. He was just like, whatever. And, you'd have to ask Mike that question, and maybe one day we'll get him on the podcast, and maybe one day we'll be brave enough to ask him that question. Yeah. We'll see. But regarding Noel was an interesting guy. I think he remembered things a certain way. I think other people remembered it differently than what he claimed to have remembered it by. So there's that. What I remember about Noel, because we interviewed him, I think, at least 3 times on the podcast, is he's a very interesting guy, very colorful, very opinionated. You did not dare challenge him when it came to his recollections of the band, even if you had supporting evidence that supported your position more than he did. But that's just the way he was. I think he was a good manager for the band at the time. He was loyal to them. He didn't screw them over. He didn't steal from them. In fact, according to him, he got them a better record deal. I don't think he has any reason to lie about that.
And the merch.
And the merch.
Was
right,
huge.
Of course. And the whole thing of them making their own merch.
So far ahead of his time. It's like not even
he made a lot of money for the band, and he did right by them. I mean, was he a traditional manager? No. Could he have done other things better? Yeah, probably, because he wasn't trained as a manager. But he did the best he could, and that was pretty damn good, honestly. So you can't take that away from him. And finally, is Ed paradoxical and or contradictory? Yeah. I mean, you should definitely read the book out now by Steve Rosen. If you want to learn what kind of person Ed was, or like have a great example, you should read Steve Rosen's biography on Edward Van Halen. Ed was an interesting guy. He did not think like everybody else. Sometimes he was in his own world. He just didn't think like us. So I think that threw a lot of people off to the point of, perhaps offending some people. But he was just like laser focused on certain things at certain times. And that's just the way he was. So, for better or worse, that's who he was. But, he left us a lot of great music, and you can never take that away from him.
That's true. Well, that wraps up the mailbag segment. And we are on to our interview with Jason Bonham from The Circle. Jason has a very interesting reveal in this interview. When I spoke to Jason, he's currently out on tour with the Led Zeppelin Evening Band, which he is absolutely phenomenal. If you're a Zeppelin fan, to see him live, he does a crazy, amazing Zeppelin show. Gotta catch that. However, we do talk about the Led Zeppelin Evening. We do talk about Black Country Communion, but a majority of the portion of this interview is about The Circle and what their plans are for next year. And let me tell you something. It is one interesting reveal, and I want you guys to catch that. Don't miss it. But before that happens, we are going to do an interview with Alan Berry from the Van Halen 1984 docuseries. Alan has put it back together in a new way without all the complications. He gets into the details of what happened to him since we last spoke to him, and releasing it and pulling it and releasing it and pulling it. So you're going to get the whole scoop behind that. And that's all coming up next. Take a listen.
We don't plan anything. It just comes. And it's actually a strange phenomenon. When we get in the studio and whoever it may be coming up with the seed of an idea, it just snowballs. You know? We'll get excited and, and a lot of times it starts out with a drum beat.
Pick up the new book, Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, by Brad Tolinski and Chris Gill. These music journalists share with fans new and old alike a candid, compulsively readable, and definitive oral history of the most influential rock guitarist since Jimi Hendrix. It is based on more than 50 hours of unreleased interviews they recorded with Eddie Van Halen over the years, most of them conducted at the legendary 5150 studios at Ed's home in Los Angeles. The heart of Eruption is drawn from these intimate and wide-ranging talks, as well as conversations with family, friends, and colleagues. In addition to discussing his greatest triumphs as a groundbreaking musician, including an unprecedented dive into Van Halen's masterpiece 1984, the book also takes an unflinching look at Edward's early struggles as a young Dutch immigrant unable to speak the English language, which resulted in lifelong issues with social anxiety and substance abuse. Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, also examines his brilliance, who changed the face of guitar manufacturing. Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen. Get your copy today on Amazon.com. Hello, loyal listeners. Wanted to let you know about our new Patreon. If you like what we do and you have the means, drop us a donation to keep the podcast going. Go to patreon.com/DD Unchained. That's patreon.com/DDUNCHAINED. Any size contributions are greatly appreciated. We have special packages to those who donate $45 or more. You'll get the Unchained package. Trust me, it's worth it. Contribute $65 or more and you can get the Romeo Delight package, which is Unchained plus more. $95 or more scores you the Top Jimmy package, which is the kitchen sink. If you're a Van Halen hardcore and listen to this cast, this is stuff you'll appreciate. It's ear candy. Those who want one of the packages simply email ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com. That's ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com to make arrangements. What is understood need not be discussed.
Hey folks, this is Steve I. You're listening to Dave and Dave Unchained, so turn it up.
And if you would like to send us a letter asking a question or making a statement or whatever you'd like to say, you can send it to ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com.
Check out the new podcast, The Rock Quarry, your place to hear in-depth interviews with some of rock's most colorful characters, with your host, entertainment journalist David J. Criblay. The Rock Quarry is available for free on Spreaker and iTunes. You can check us out on Facebook at The Rock Quarry Podcast, on Twitter at Rock Quarry Pod, on Instagram at The Rock Quarry Podcast, or email us at therockquarrypodcast@gmail.com.
My idols were never music. I have no musical influences, so to speak. My idols were always people like Genghis Khan or Muhammad Ali or Alexander the Great or the guy who invented McDonald's hamburgers. You know, it was always somebody else far removed from music. And that's why a lot of times if you listen to Van Halen records, there's a lot of things that just seem not to have anything to do with rock and roll. That's because I've never written down any lyrics. Most of them are made up in the studio. Think about the line going up the back of the stockings, you know, and that's what you just make it up. You talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have an incredible guest this evening. He is back. It is Alan Berry, the infamous Alan Berry. Since the last time he was here, he has become infamous. So he is here to talk about his Van Halen 1984 docu-series Situation. Alan was on our last cast as a message in June, but he is coming on here to give us the wild ride that he has had since he was last a guest here, and he's going to discuss this. Alan, how are you?
Hey, good, man. How you guys doing?
He's alive and well, folks. That's his voice, alive and clear here. Take us through the process from the moment we left you last, when you were about to release your 1984 Van Halen docuseries. Take us through step by step what happened from the beginning.
I think it was maybe another couple of weeks before I actually released the videos, but I still had some tweaking to do to the videos. I got them all primed up. I don't know, maybe 3 weeks after I recorded the podcast with you guys, the same week that I think you guys released it, somewhere abouts, I put out the first 2 episodes, episode 1 and episode 2, which is Building 5150 and The Road to the US Festival. I was just overwhelmed with all the positive comments, right? Everybody was just, and I'm not just trying to butter my bread and say how great my videos are, but it seemed like I got a really great response. The only big pushback I really got was where I said that there's keyboards on, so this is love.
Right.
But no, I said it wrong again, didn't I?
Well, I remember you mentioning that to me, yeah, and one of our listeners wrote in about that, yeah.
Yeah, we even found the clip with the isolated keyboard track on it on YouTube.
Right. So, long story short, the videos were doing very well.
Right.
Within 1 week, episode 1 was up to like 170,000 views, and then the other one was up to like 150,000 views. And I was tracking it compared to my other videos, and they were both on track to be at 1 million views, probably in about 3 months or so, but they were doing very well. Moving along to episode 3, I'm working on that. On May 31st, I get a letter from 2 Warner Brothers lawyers basically saying, hey, we saw that you had these videos out. We don't show any licensing for these videos. Can we get together and talk? And of course, I immediately said, yeah, let's get together and talk. But it was going to be a long weekend, and both of them were out until, I think, the following Monday or Tuesday. So on June 5th, I had a very friendly 20-minute phone call with one of the Warner Brothers lawyers. The other one was still out. And he seemed to get that I was not looking to rip Van Halen or Warner Brothers off. Actually, he was very cool. One of the first things he said to me was, nobody's planning on suing you. And so I was like, whew, that was a big relief on my part, right? So, you know, we had a little bit of going back and forth, and I just kind of, you know, said, hey, you know, so what do you think the road forward is? How can we solve this? And he thought that going through their sync department would be the best first step, meaning that actually to properly license it. You know, thought in my head is, there's no way I'm going to be able to afford this, right? How could we do this? And he let me know that there is kind of a sliding scale, that maybe there is something that could be worked out. And so I'm like, okay, this would be excellent. All right, let's look at that. During that conversation, I was like, so what is the issue, man? Because if you look on YouTube, there's tens of thousands of Van Halen videos that have unlicensed music. I did like just this quick search on YouTube, and one of the first videos that popped up is like the top 20 Van Halen songs, you know, and it's 20 of the best songs all in one video, you know, by some anonymous account or whatever. And, or even like the full US Festival is up for anybody to view, which I think is great. So it's like, so I'm asking him, why do you think that this is an issue? He told me honestly, he didn't really know. He kind of speculated. He said he knows it's a fan video, and he didn't think it was harmful. But he thought that maybe Van Halen is planning to put together a huge documentary sometime, and this would cannibalize it. And I had to kind of laugh back and be like, come on, man. If Netflix or HBO is going to do a Van Halen documentary, first of all, I hope it's a heck of a lot better than mine. And second, that's not going to take away any viewers. There's no viewers that are going to watch my fan version and be like, oh, Netflix has got a Van Halen doc, I'm not watching that. We know they're going to watch both.
Also, not only that, but yours is done in such a specific style, they would never go the route you went because you're all about showing items, pictures, you have voiceover narration, and theirs would have interviews and live clips and all that kinds of stuff that you don't have access to. On top of all that, the regular generic stuff they haven't even released. I can't imagine they're going to go through a whole documentary. I mean, that's, you know.
Right, and plus they're going to have a whole production team, right?
Yeah.
My thing is okay, but I'm not a team of editors, right? I don't have the time to spend on a lot of motion graphics and making it really look too slick. It would be a completely different ball game. He didn't acknowledge exactly what I was saying. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he did in some way. He got what I was saying, that really wasn't it. But listen, to be fair to the guy, this is his job. He was being a lawyer for Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was just doing his job, so it's all good. One of the things I asked him about was, did this request come from a band member? Did somebody in the band ask Warner Brothers to have this taken down? And he said, no, I don't think so. So I would guess he would know that at that point since he's in this department, but he didn't think so. And then I said, well, you know, what if the band members were behind it, right? What if they did like it? Because I know with some of my other videos, the bands actually like it. So he said it would help. He said, now, if another band member wasn't supportive, it could still be an issue. But if you got one of the band members championing your project, that'll definitely help. Now, let me circle back a little bit. When you talk about, like, there's tens of thousands of videos that don't have copyright strikes or they allow it to be up, the reason why, and I just learned this too, is with copyright law, the copyright holder can be selective in their enforcement. Unlike trademark law, where they can't be selective. They have to enforce their trademark or they could lose their trademark. In copyright law, they can be selective. So by them saying, all right, the tapes archive, we're going to take you down, but this other channel here that has the US Festival up, we're not going to do anything about it. There's no legal ramifications for them to decide that. So going back to, if a band member wanted to have it up, it could be in their purview to say, okay, we're going to allow it. They're not going to officially endorse it. They're just basically going to look the other way, and it's completely legal.
That's interesting. I had heard about the trademark rule that, like, it has to be all or nothing or you lose it. But I didn't realize there was a difference between that and copyright. So thank you for explaining that difference. That's very helpful.
Think about it, though. Van Halen is horrible about even enforcing their trademark. How many times have you been on Facebook and you get an ad for one of those Van Halen shirts? Those are absolutely
well, that's true, but I do remember that when they first trademarked the stripes and a few years after that, they were very vigilant in doing that.
In terms of the stripes, they were more on top of the stripes than anything else. There is a fuck ton of Van Halen bootleg shit being sold. I mean, actually sold. People making money, direct money, off the band's name, logo, whatever you want to call it, that is really out there, and they're not hiding it either. They're very upfront about it compared to what Alan is doing here. If anything Alan is doing, and if anybody saw his videos, they are nothing but promoting the legacy of the band. So at this point, did you bring it to Alex? Was the next step?
No, it wasn't. So the lawyers, again, great guy. When I would ask him questions or whatever, he kept coming back to, let's look into the sync license. I'm like, okay, hey, let's do that. We hung up the phone. Everything was great. The next day, I received a letter from both the lawyers saying, following your call with Tim, we circled back internally with our licensing team, Rhino, and unfortunately, Rhino declined to offer a license for the film's use of the Van Halen's music. Accordingly, we must ask that you cease and desist from any and all exploitation of WMG sound recordings and musical compositions, including the exploitation on YouTube. Please kindly confirm compliance. So they basically said, we don't care. We're not going to license it anyways, no matter what the cost. So basically they said, please kindly confirm your compliance. And I responded back to them and I asked for another call because it just didn't make sense to me. And, you know, the fans wanted to see it. I felt at that time that the band members wouldn't have cared. It actually makes money for Warner Bros. Directly and indirectly because they were the ones that were monetized it because I had Van Halen songs in it. So anytime anybody watched an ad, that money went to Warner Brothers. They finally responded back to me and said, basically, we're not your lawyers. We can't give you legal advice. This is what's up. Move along. And that's fair. I was like, all right. One thing I do want to point out here is that this is Van Halen and Warner Bros. Intellectual property. And it is completely in their legal right to do this. My side of it is I just don't agree with it as a fan.
Right.
But I'm not saying they don't have the right. They own that property. They have that IP. Again, it's in their right. So I start thinking, well, what can I do? Because I still want to get these videos out. Put a lot of work into it. How can I do it? And the first thing, of course, is, well, replace the music with stock music. And I'm thinking, I don't want to do that because I just hate videos like that, right? But the more I think about it, it's like, I don't know what else the answer is. So I start toying with that idea. It sucked, but I started toying with it. And in the meantime, I started talking to a friend of mine that is actually friendly with the Van Halen camp and knows everybody there, has phone numbers and all that. And I was talking to him, and he's like, do you want me to make a call to Al? I'm like, are you fucking kidding? I was like, would you make a call to Al? And he's like, I don't know that I want to, but he goes, I agree with you. I think that this is a good thing for the fans or for the Van Halen legacy. There's really nothing else out there going on for Van Halen. You know, he had seen it too, and he thought it was really good. He's like, I'll make the phone call. You know, at that point, I'm stoked because to me, Alex Van Halen was always one of these cool motherfucking dudes, right? I mean, I grew up loving Van Halen, so to me, he was cool. So one of the things I want to say about after I got the email from the lawyers was, and to be cool to them, they did not copyright strike me. They could have taken down my channel, right? With copyright strike. So, and since they offered this to me, I was like, all right, I'm just going to make the videos private. So I'm the one that made the videos private on my channel. And so when I was talking to my buddy about reaching out to Al, I came up with a couple new links and I gave it to him, and he gives Al a call and he spells it all out for Al. He comes back to me. He's like, well, I talked to him, but you know, it doesn't sound real good. Al was not that interested in it. He did not seem to be too open to any of this, and he saw it more of me taking money out of their pocket. And when my friend explained to him, no, he's not monetizing it. You know, he can even show proof that he's not monetizing it. Al kind of came back with, yeah, right. You know, he even mentioned that he saw the title 5150 and he's like, you can't even do that. That's a trademark violation. So just the title alone, Al wasn't cool with. So my friend said, come on, man, just watch him and see what you think. And Al ended up saying, okay. So about another week passed. My buddy called him again. Al pretty much was saying the same thing. Now, I have no idea how much of it Al watched. He could have watched 5 seconds of it. He could have watched the whole thing. But Al was not interested. And I guess even somebody, it could have possibly been his wife, in the background said, when my friend said that Warner Bros. Had taken him down, she said, well, that's a good thing. So in their mind, or from what I understand, from what I was told, Al felt like it was a good thing that these videos were taken down.
Well, that's disappointing.
Yeah, of course.
It's very disappointing. My buddy was so frustrated talking to him. I'm reading a little bit of Sammy Hagar's leaked out book, the chapters that were leaked out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a great read.
It is. And he says the same things, that Al is like talking to a rock. You can't get anything through him. If he has the mindset that you're ripping him off, then he's not listening to it. Now, to be fair to Al, I don't know if that comes from years of being ripped off and he's just built up this wall and doesn't let anybody else in. I have no idea, but he was not having it.
I think you could see this in the video from 2012 where Alex, Ed, and Dave are in black and white and they're being interviewed. It's probably like 15-minute plus video. It's very, very interesting interview. Al goes into an entire description, and he's not wrong, about how the band was ripped off when they first started. And it is brutal to hear. I mean, it really was. I can understand. So he's a little gun shy, I guess, when it comes to the music business in general, which, let's be honest, has had a series of ripping off artists. But here we are. You're not a record company. You're not a guy trying to make money off them. You're just a fan. However, you know, he probably doesn't want to hear it. Who knows if he even watched them? I mean, you just don't even know. So he just might not be like, oh, no, forget it. Yeah, take it down. Like, almost like, get it out of here. I don't want to deal with it. Just get rid of it. I don't want anybody making money off my name and my band. You know, it might be something as generic as that.
Yeah, it could have been.
Yeah.
But I guess where I push a little bit back on that is the person that was talking to him, he's known for a long time. And so if a buddy of yours came to you and said, hey, man, no, I know what you're saying, but I want you to check this out. This dude, I'm vouching for this person, right?
Right.
I think you take it differently. I don't know, you know, Alex is a rock star or whatever, but he knew nothing about it. That tells me he must not really pay attention to the Van Halen world, because I'm in every forum on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Reddit. I'm every Van Halen forum platform there is talk about this project, but he knew nothing about it.
No.
So it's like, does he not have any friends?
It's just, some people live in an isolated bubble, especially when it comes to their own personal stuff. It's amazing, but I have found that I have interviewed hundreds of rock stars. And I have to be honest with you, one thing that I have learned is if you want to know about a band or the rock star, don't ask the band or the rock star. They don't know shit. There are times, and I'm not talking about Al specifically, I'm talking about just in general. There are times when you can mention a song, they couldn't even tell you what album it was from. If you have, like Van Halen, say 12 albums, and you can't tell me which album it comes off, I mean, it's just a little weird. You know what I mean? Like when they're that out of it, but there's so many people that don't know about their own band. There are things that happen, like there's clear as day. I mean, Sammy Hagar is on his live album, and every time they play a Van Halen song, he announces the year. Every year is wrong on the live album. But you think someone, even editing the music, would say, Sam, not for nothing, but that wasn't 1992. That was 1991, and that wasn't 1987. That was 1988. The weird thing is throughout the whole album, every time they go into a song by Van Halen, he shouts out the year and it's wrong. It's amazing the things that they miss.
Right. I mean, the other thing is if Al's not an internet person, he's not going to know a lot about this.
No,
and there's still a lot of people out there who are just like, you know what? I can't be bothered with YouTube. Can't be bothered with Facebook. Can't be bothered with the internet. I got other people to do that for me. I mean, Al's notorious for not having a Facebook account. If he wants to say anything, he calls up the Van Halen news desk and has them post it. That's where he's coming from.
Yeah.
He doesn't know about it because he's not in that world, to be fair.
Yeah, it's completely fair what you guys are saying. I mostly bring up this because I'm going to contrast that with Roth.
Okay.
So, and plus, these are old dudes, too, right? The older I get, I forget shit, too. So hopefully this doesn't come across too much of me bashing Al.
No, you're explaining the situation. No one's bashing anybody.
No, not at all. So please continue.
Yeah.
So at that point, I'm like, all right, well, if Al's adamantly against this, there's no way Roth's going to be behind it because I kind of take him a little bit to task on episode 2.
Sure.
I don't really take him to task. I just kind of, have some fun with his personality.
Right.
As a diss. I think David Lee Roth is one of the greatest frontmen ever, right?
Of course.
But I thought, man, if he sees that, he's not going to be into it at all. So I just kind of start moving along and having conversations with different people that are in the Van Halen world. I'm like, man, what should I do, right? And it keeps going back to, well, you got to figure out something out with that music. So I'm still working on that. I don't know, another week or two passed, and I talked to another buddy, and he has connections with Roth. And I'm talking to him. He's like, well, do you want me to call Roth's manager? And I'm again like, holy shit, would you? Are you serious? And I was like, I don't know if he's going to like these parts or whatever. And he's like, I'm like, all right, do it, man. So he calls Roth's manager and gives her the whole backstory. And she's like, okay, cool. When she calls Roth, the first thing Roth says is, oh, is this that fan-made documentary? And he goes, is it made by a company or is it made by an actual fan? So Roth actually already knew about it. And that's the contrast that I wanted to say with Al, is that not a diss on necessarily Al, but I think Roth pays attention to what's going on with the Van Halen legacy. And my personal opinion is I don't think he's happy with it. So he reaches out to her. Roth is very interested. So I do the same thing again. I send over the first 2 episodes via the manager. And the next day I get the text saying, Roth loves this. Roth loves these videos. He gets it. He thinks the humor's funny. He thinks this is awesome. He wants to get behind it. He's down with this stuff. I'm like very, very thrilled at this point. So another day or so passes. I get a text saying that Roth wants me to work on a video with him. And I'm like, holy shit, man, this is just awesome.
Wow.
Of course, I'm like, look, and they're asking me like, how much do I want to be paid for it? And I'm like, you guys are helping me get these videos back up, but you don't owe me anything. I'm happy to do a video with Diamond Dave for free. Well, about a few hours later, I'm on social media and somebody says, hey, congrats, your video's up on David Lee Roth's channel. I'm like, what? I had never agreed to my video being up on David Lee Roth's channel at that point. I would have been fine with it, but I had never agreed to that. So
Right.
I was completely surprised by this, and I had a little bit of odd feelings with it. So they put up the video, or in the description, they also put up the links from my personal channel of the screener versions that I had sent them. So it was kind of put up just kind of willy-nilly. On one side, I'm thinking, well, yeah, dude, but what you bitching about, right? I mean, Daily Roth just put up your video. What are you bitching about? You know, and I'm just thinking about it. So I reached back out to the manager. I'm like, hey, we never agreed to this. Then we got on a call, and she's like, Alan, or I asked you about him putting snippets on his Instagram and social. And I was like, yeah, I agreed to that, not the whole thing. And so she's like, the whole thing's up? And I'm like, yeah. So it's my opinion. She didn't know it was just going to be put up either. But long story short, the more I thought about it, I'm like, who gives a shit, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, it's great. I was like, can I put mine back up? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, great. So then I put my versions back up too. And I'm thinking this is awesome. Now, in my mind, I speculated that she had talked to Warner Brothers and got the okay because she had told me it was okay. And then one of my buddies was like, hey, man, you better make sure that she actually got the clearance for it. And I started thinking, oh, man, maybe she didn't. So I reached back out, and she's like, now this is where her and my story will be different. She will tell you that she never told me it was okay. I heard her say it was okay. That's my story. Now, did I just make it up and hear that? Maybe so. I don't know, right? It was just like such a hurried thing. So I don't want to say that she didn't say it, but I heard her say it. At least that's what I thought. She would say that she never said it.
So there was some confusion. There was some confusion.
Yes, there was definitely confusions.
Okay.
And because most of this was a phone call, we should have done it via email to where everything was bullet pointed and laid out. So I blame that on myself. I should have been clear in what's moving forward. I was just so stoked about Roth being involved that I probably got caught up in the moment.
Right.
And I didn't handle it like I should have handled it, to be fair to everybody on their side.
Okay.
But she told me, she goes, Warner Brothers is pissed. And this is a text, and I was like, at me, at Roth, or at both? And then she never responded. And then my buddy let me know that Roth put it up and basically said, I don't care what Warner Brothers, this is me saying what I think Roth said. I don't know that Roth said this.
Right.
That he didn't really care about if Warner Bros. Didn't want it up or not. He wanted it up, so he put it up. And he doesn't care if they copyright strike or if they send him a cease and desist. He's just going to let it ride. But for me, I can't do that. I can't afford to have copyright strikes or to have a lawsuit, so I take my versions right back down.
Okay.
And then long story short, with the Roth camp, Diamond Dave is the man. I mean, as far as the Van Halen legacy goes, he gets it.
Right.
But he's not in charge of the Van Halen legacy as far as I know. The only issue that we had was the discrepancy of the uploading, but who gives a shit? I don't care. I'm glad it's up there. Listen, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying anything negative against Roth. I'm so appreciative that he saw my video and he got it. He got what I'm doing was for the love of Van Halen. And Dave Lee Roth still has that love for Van Halen too, enough to where he's going to say, this fan made this fucking video. I'm going to put it up on my YouTube channel, and I don't care what happens about it because I think that this is cool. As far as Roth and I working together, I'm not sure that that will happen because of that miscommunication between me and his manager.
Yeah.
I just don't think that there's wanting on either side. I doubt that she would want to work with me, and I'm not for sure that I'd want to work with her. But again, it's nothing against her either. She was totally cool.
Right.
I just don't know that that's going to be in the cards.
Let me ask you this. Do you think Roth appreciated what you were doing and knew full well that he doesn't have control of the Van Halen legacy, but also knows he's an original member of Van Halen and prominently featured in these videos, and he looked towards Al and he's like, fuck it, put it up, see what Al says. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I wonder if it was like I'm gonna send this arrow right across the river and see what happens. Like, I'm wondering if he did that as sort of a, let's see what kind of reaction I get from the other side.
I never heard that in the scuttlebutt of the back and forth of talking to the manager and my friend, because I never talked to Roth. Rarely anybody talks to Roth. My understanding was, and I know this is going to sound like I'm bragging about this, but he fucking loved the videos.
Well, you heard directly from his manager that he did, so that's enough.
Yes, and he got the sense of humor. He thought it was funny as hell.
It is funny as hell.
I was talking to the manager. I was like, look, I want to send you over these other episodes, but I got to tell you that there's stuff in it that I don't know that Dave's going to like, because I tell a different side of stories and I didn't have his side of the story, so I don't know. And I just wanted to be completely honest, because I didn't want all of a sudden Roth to be sitting there watching the video and be like, what's this bullshit? He's saying I didn't do this or I did that. So I gave him the heads up. She went and talked to Dave about it, and she came back and said, Roth said he's not made of glass. He gets it that this is your side of the story. This is what you've heard, and he doesn't want to do anything to change your artistic point of view in the videos. That, to me, said so much about him.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, damn, Diamond Dave, right on.
But you know what it is also about Dave? He's a sharp dude. He has a very unique mind and perspective, but he's very acute about things. Interesting thing about Dave is he knows, good or bad, it's all part of this rock and roll legacy, and it actually only enhances the legacy. People, they hear this, they hear that, and almost makes it more interesting that there's all these things swirling around out there, you know what I mean? Like, you know, is Roth difficult to work with? Is he this? Is he that? I mean, there's so many things swirling around. Let's be honest, it makes him an interesting character. He is an interesting character. He is a piece of pop culture at this point. And how many people are that interesting? There's a lot of rock stars. We love their music. Guys aren't always that interesting. These guys are interesting. They really are interesting on top of the music being amazing. The whole personalities and the different thing back and forth. I mean, Van Halen has a whole sort of thing going on besides even the music. I mean, that's what's incredible. Their story, their drama, their soap opera, and their back and forth is as lively and strong almost as the music legacy. Obviously, the music takes priority and it's, you know, obviously rises above everything. But how many bands? You could write an entire book about Van Halen and not even discuss any music.
That's very true. And Alan, by the way, I want to congratulate you because I think you have obtained the most coherent statement from David Lee Roth in the last 20 years.
That's the truth.
That I've ever heard. So hats off to you, sir.
Yeah.
So continue your story, please.
Please.
Well, I just want to add on to what Loud Dave was saying is that the thing about Roth is he knows how to promote too, right? And he doesn't care if it's at his expense. He's a promoter, right?
Yep.
He's a showman.
Yep.
He gets that. And I don't think he takes himself too seriously, where I think Al overtly takes himself way too seriously and just doesn't get it. I'm not dissing on him. I just think that's how it is.
I think with Roth, any news is good news.
Yep.
Right.
That's right.
So basically, it's back to Warner Brothers is not telling me everything is good, right? They're not saying that I can put this stuff up. And I don't know if they're pissed at me or if they're pissed at Roth. Some people told me not to do this, but I'd rather build a bridge. I sent an email back out to the two lawyers. I was like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put out these videos. I'm going to strip all the Van Halen music and any Warner Brothers that I think is your guys' content or that you own it. I'm going to strip it out and I'm going to promote these videos. But first, I'm going to send them to you guys, and you guys can point out whatever you want that you think I should take it out. And there's going to be a few snippets here and there that I think falls under fair use. But other than that, it's not going to be their music. So 2 weeks ago, I sent the lawyers episode 1. And in the email, I say to them, I'm guessing you guys won't ever respond, but all I can do is control me. So here it is. Take a look at it. Somebody there did watch it. A few people watched it because I only sent it to them, but I never heard anything back. And then this past Wednesday, I re-released episode 1.
When you stripped the stuff out and you did the edits, how did you feel about it? Did you feel okay about the way the episode ran with the new edits?
Episode 1 wasn't as bad, and I'm glad David Lee Roth put up episode 2, because episode 2 would have been really tough, because I didn't know what I was going to do about the S Festival part, right? That's a huge chunk of it.
Right.
And so I'm glad that he put up with the copyright music. Episode 1 didn't have as much in there, so it was a little bit easier, but no, man, I fucking hated it. I did. I was just like, why am I doing this? Why am I wasting my goddamn time on this? There's no money involved. All I'm getting is headaches. Why am I doing this? And I kept coming back to Dave, people like you know, there's like, yeah, people want to hear this story, you know, you got good stuff or whatever. And I was like, all right, I got to figure out how I can get, even if I have to take out all the music, I got to figure out how I can put it out just so people can check it out. You know, I didn't want to throw away 8 months of time.
Of course. Now, can you also explain to our listeners what is considered fair use?
That is $1 million question. The challenge with fair use is that it's never decided by lawyers. It's only going to be decided by a judge. And there's all kinds of gray areas with it. So it's subjective, right? So if I'm talking about Eddie Van Halen is playing this slide scale right here as he hits this note. Well, if I play that music right there, that's fair use because I'm talking exactly about what he's doing on that song. But if I'm just generally talking about something else with Van Halen, and I'm not talking specifically about that, that's not fair use.
All right, so you need to use it as a reference point.
Yeah, just think about the news. Like when you see the news at night, they're all using fair use.
Right.
So they can just put things off Twitter, but they all get to use fair use. But you can still sue them. But the problem with that is that lawsuits cost a lot of money. So let's say that I'm completely using fair use, how it's been deemed to be used. Warner Brothers could still come back and say, nah, we still think it's copyright infringement. And then they say, here's a lawsuit. And we're only going to find out if it's actually fair use when it gets in front of a judge. And then a judge is going to subjectively decide, yes, this is fair use, or no, it's not fair use.
Wow.
So I'm being very cautious in what I think is fair use, and I stand by what I do have as fair use in those videos. So, i.e., episode 1, there's 2 keyboard tracks, and I say they play keyboard on this track and they play keyboard on that track, and I play the little keyboard snippet.
Okay.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And I move on.
All right, that's cool.
Okay, so while I was in the process of releasing episode 1, Dave, to your credit, you're one of these people too that said, hey man, why don't you get somebody that sounds like Van Halen and do it with that. Other people have said, well, why don't you just get cover tunes, which is a fair call out, right? You see cover songs all up and down on YouTube. The thing is technically cover songs are copyright infringement.
Wow.
When David Lee Roth himself does a cover version of a Van Halen song on his YouTube channel, technically that's a copyright infringement because he only owns 25% of it. It's one of those things where Warner Bros. Looks the other way. So for me, I could not get away, or at least I was in fear of just having Van Halen covers on it. So I knew that wasn't an option. But I did kind of like that idea. Out of nowhere, this guy, Tom Shreds, YouTube at Tom Shreds, reaches out and says, hey man, you need my help? This guy is a phenomenal guitar player.
Yeah.
I want everybody to go check him out on YouTube at Tom Shreds. That's his social media everywhere.
Okay.
He's got the tone, he's got the sound, he knows how to play Eddie Van Halen inside and out.
Beautiful.
And he's this Australian cat, just this awesome guy. And so he's helping me build out the soundtrack for the rest of the series for episode 3 through 5. And I think there's a little snippet on episode 1. But 3 through 5, what you're going to hear, like on the next episode, it's all based around the making of 1984. Every track, I have muted the original version, with the exception of a couple fair use parts, and I'm using his sound-alike tracks.
Wow.
And so far, it sounds pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. It's not cheeseball stock music. It's not Van Halen, but it's a good way for me to still get out the story, people still be able to enjoy it and not be like, what's this cheeseball music, right? This dude's tone is just fire. It's dead on.
That's awesome. So when are you dropping 3 through 5?
Ironically, just today, I sent over episode 3 to the lawyers again. I don't think I'll hear back from them, but I sent them the episode. So if I don't hear anything back from them, I'm going to be dropping it the 26th. So maybe right around the time that you're releasing this episode.
Gary's birthday. There you go.
I did it.
It's my son's birthday. That's why I know it's Gary's birthday. And also because I'm a Van Halen fan. But the 26th of July, Gary Sharon's birthday, and my son Dan's birthday. It's so funny. My son Dan is born on Gary's birthday. My daughter is born on Eddie's birthday. And my son Tom is days away from David Lee Roth's birthday.
Oh, wow.
And Sammy's.
A couple other things I just want to mention. One is that when everybody sees these next episodes, just realize that Alex didn't see any of these. So they didn't say no to it because of the content in episode 3 through 5. Because in 3 through 5, I put on more my documentarian hat and less my fan hat. I speak out some things that I think some Van Halen fans are not going to like me about. Dave, you'll be happy to know I haven't changed any of the script.
Good,
the script
good.
is still in. All the stories are still in there.
That is so
Excellent.
key. That's the key part of the whole thing. As much as Alan is working heavily on attaching the music, kind of makes it the glue to attach everything, the story and all the research that he does, that is what is being preserved. That is what is the value of this docuseries. Because, of course, we all know the music, we have the music, and of course it's important to include, and I understand his dilemma here, but the most important thing is that he has his story, his script, his voiceover, his items that he shows there. It is worth it. Even if you took every drop of music out of the whole thing and showed it, it's still worth it. But thank you, Tom Shreds, for coming in here and helping our friend Alan out with that. That is definitely important. I think that's so key. That's the most important thing, Alan. You should feel very happy about that. And you've gone to really long lengths to try to do the right thing here. You're a Van Halen fan. No one's criticizing Al. Look, that's his family name. That's his band. He's trying to protect himself. We all know that it's America. He's got every right in the world to do so. And David Lee Roth has his right to do what he does. Listen, you're just trying to do right by the fans, by Van Halen. You're trying to do everything. So
I want to butter your guys' bread a bit. I can't thank you two enough, right? So I try to, and not that your guys' podcast isn't great. It is great. But I wanted to try to get onto a bigger platform a little bit. And I tried to reach out to Rick Beato and Eddie Trunk. And I get it. They got their own thing, especially with Rick. I love Rick Beato. But it was surprising to me that Eddie Trunk didn't want to have me on or to talk about it. And I'm not hating on him. I just don't understand why this wouldn't be a viable story for him, the amount of times that he's talked about Van Halen. So
this is only my theory. I'll tell you why. Because it doesn't involve Sammy Hagar, who's his best friend. That's number one. Okay? Number two, he has a bugaboo up his you-know-what about David Lee Roth.
Yep.
I think, and this is just a theory, and Dave and I have discussed this, because he's never got an interview with David Lee Roth. Well, he interviews Sammy like every other week, right?
Right.
I mean, obviously I'm exaggerating, but, he's great friends with Sammy. He never got an interview with David Lee Roth. And so here you are like, hey, I want to get on the show and talk about how great David Lee Roth is. And he's probably like, no, not so much, Yeah. It's really a shame because, I mean, for better or for worse, Alan, the story behind the documentary was gaining momentum. There was something there, and it's too bad that you couldn't get on a bigger platform to say, hey, listen, I was doing this as a fan, and one of the band members completely shot me down. And if it wasn't for the other band member, I wouldn't even have a prayer.
To be honest, I also think that Eddie comes from a big corporate entity, which is Sirius XM. He is a employee of them. Therefore, he has a lot of people to answer to. They have legal departments. And if they say, Ed, this guy's in a little bit of a scuttlebutt with Warner Brothers, Ed probably like, you know what? Let's just stay away from it. It might be something like that. It might not even be something so personal as, oh, screw that guy. I don't want him on here. It might not be that. Or he might have a producer who says, Ed, we can't really be having fans on. We really got to stick to interviewing the celebrities. And if you have fans on, you have them on as a caller, asking you a question. But if we start doing fans as guests, then we're going to open this up to a whole new thing. Or if you have fans on as guests, then we're not going to be able to get Brian Johnson from AC/DC on next week because he's going to think it's a podcast and it's not a podcast. We're a Sirius XM here. People are paying for this subscription. It might be something like that. So not so much to bash Eddie, and I know Dave has all his points are valid for sure. Everything Dave said is 100% on. However, I do think there's probably some element that he's dealing with because he has a lot of people to answer to. Eddie can't just do whatever the hell he wants on there.
That's a good point, Dave.
Yeah.
You raised a good point.
Fair enough. But the crazy thing was he had talked about it before. And so I started reaching out and said, hey, I'm right here. I'll come on and talk about it. And then just nothing. So my point with this was, though, I mean, you guys have me on. So I just appreciate you two so much.
I appreciate
for giving me a place to be able to even voice this stuff because a lot of people are asking me what's going on, etc. And I just think that it's great that you guys allow me to come on and ramble on for 45 minutes and tell you the backstory.
Well, for sure, because we are big fans. We are not beholden to any corporate entity. A lot of people are like FOVH, Friends of Van Halen. Everybody knows somebody in the band, and so they have to be careful what they say, what they don't say, and stuff like this. And Dave and I are just like, you know what? We're just two guys doing a podcast, and we just want to talk about the issue. I mean, we've had guests on the show before who turned out afterwards it was somewhat controversial that we had them on, and we were just like, hey, the guy wrote a book. We asked him about the book. We didn't know there was going to be such a hullabaloo about the book. So, here we are. We interviewed you. You did a video. We're like, oh, this is cool. We're going to interview the guy about the video. And now there's somewhat of a hullabaloo about the video. But, who cares? It's sad that there's this much drama. It's not surprising because anything related to Van Halen is just filled with freaking drama, unfortunately. But we're actually just really so grateful that you came onto the podcast and we're willing to spend this time to talk about it.
Alan, I have to ask you, are you now afraid to go forward with anything Van Halen?
Oh, Yeah, I'm done. So actually, I may be done with music documentaries, to be honest with you.
Oh my God.
Man, there's so many bands I love and so many things I want to do, but the record labels, they just seem ass backwards somewhat still. I mean, I get it. It's their copyright for sure, but I don't think they understand 20 years from now, most Van Halen fans are going to be dead, right? And nobody's going to give a shit about this. And maybe my son or my granddaughter will repost this on YouTube 20 years from now, and nobody will give a shit, right? It won't matter. One notable person told me, you almost have to get the artist permission moving forward because I've got too big of a spotlight. So I just don't know, man.
Yeah.
I wanted to do something on Fair Warning. That's my favorite album.
Oh.
I just don't see how I can. Too many headaches.
Oh, Jesus. Now you're breaking my heart. First of all, Fair Warning, our favorite album. You're talking to you. We're going to do something on the South American tour from 83. Now that's in the fucking toilet. Thanks a lot. Oh, no.
But I think, and I hear you, man, but I think if you were me, you'd probably look at
No. We understand where you're coming from. Listen, you've been through enough. Aside from all of that, the docuseries is going to be out. You guys are going to be able to see all 5 episodes. Watch them within 24 hours because you never know. No, listen, everybody's got to watch this. It's essential viewing. Honest to God, the reason why Alan is on here is because he belongs here, because he is a Van Halen fan. If you watch the docuseries, even if you see one episode, you will get his perspective, his tone, and his whole style. You're going to love it. I promise you're going to love it. There's no way that you're not going to absorb this. If you're a listener to this podcast, this is directly up your alley. Like Dave said, my friend Dave here, he said it right there. This is the best Van Halen release to come out in a long time, and it really, really is. It has that kind of flavor. This is right in the vein of what everybody on this podcast wants. Exactly. So you gotta watch it. Totally worth the time. And now it's like the Prince Black album. They take it away and you want it even more. But listen, I think it's only going to work to your advantage.
What you said is true. If you see the new release pop out, and I don't give a shit, download it, do whatever, because I really don't know what's going to happen. I'm hoping everything's cool with Warner Brothers because I'm taking out the music. I really don't know, and I can't legally fight them. So if I get some other cease and desist for these upcoming episodes, I got them taken down. Now, real quick on that note, I do know that there's screener copies of all these floating out there through various people. Now, if one of them or any of them decide to put that out on a torrent or whatever, I have zero issues with that. I won't have anything to do with it.
All right.
But moving forward, you may see that. But if you ever see this motherfucker on eBay and somebody's trying to charge you for it, do not pay for it. Nobody should ever have to pay for these videos. And in fact, on the episode 1, since I stripped all the Van Halen music out, I could have monetized the video, but I didn't because I don't think anybody should have to see commercials, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And moving forward, I'm going to do that with all the episodes. So you should not see commercials on any of these videos.
Okay, well, that'll be great, and it'll certainly be worth it, and it is, I believe, totally, it's like over 2.5 hours, right?
Yeah, so I have done some edits, not of content, but just tightening stuff up.
Yeah.
So it's probably around 220.
All right, 220. All right, so about 220. That's a nice long amount of time, and there really is, like I said, it's like a well-stitched sweater, you know, it's really well made, it's got quality, and like I said, there's visuals on there that you'll be stunned by. There's parts of the story that I haven't heard before, which was incredible, and anything that wows me, you know, I watch so many documentaries, and I'm like, yeah, basic strokes, and it's always like, oh, well, I started playing guitar, and Ed started playing drums, and then we switched. This is not what this is about. This is really the nitty-gritty.
I agree that if you're a diehard Van Halen fan, you're big chunk of this, but there are things coming up that you do not know that I found when I interviewed specific people.
Yep.
One of the big bombs is coming up in episode 3, and I've also got to tell you there's a Dave and Dave Easter egg in episode 3 too.
Ooh, wow, we got to check that out for sure. But let me tell you, honestly, whenever I can read a Van Halen article, read a Van Halen book, watch a Van Halen video, and if I get a couple of kernels out of it that I didn't know, I go crazy. When I saw Alan's docuseries, I got multiple kernels out of each episode. So I was like, oh shit. I mean, there was times I had to pause it and just like absorb some of the stuff because it was coming too fast. And I was like, I need to take this in and I need to like rewind it and look back. It was that good, guys. I was really, really impressed. That's why, listen, we don't have guests back to back. Well, it's not back to back, but from May to July, we typically don't have guests that close in, but this is well worth it because Alan has not only a story to tell when he was making the docuseries, but now he's got a story to tell about releasing it. You could almost make a video on what happened to the docuseries.
Oh, I've thought about it, man. I just can't stomach it.
I don't blame you. He's been through a lot, guys. This is more than any fan should really stand. He really should be commended for it, and I'm sure you're going to get love from the Van Halen fans who are starving for material.
Just a FYI, I mean, like, all the comments are very supportive.
Right.
They get it. So
yeah.
The Van Halen fan, man, the reason I keep doing this.
There are fans that slept on it, and then they got upset that they missed it. And I understand. I mean, life happens. Everybody's working. They got families, all kinds of stuff going on. But, you know, when you miss something, it's really hard because it's like, oh, shit, that was out for a week, and now it's gone, and I wanted to see it. And there's so many people, what happened? I mean, you know how many letters we got? Like, what happened? We heard Alan on your podcast. We went to go watch it, and everybody turns into Jerry Seinfeld. They're like, what's going on? So, yeah, it was true, but everybody's excited. Now, you're a known entity at this point, and there's some hype behind it. Listen to me, there's a buzz, dude. Come on, there's a fucking buzz. 96% on Rotten Tomatoes at this point.
Okay.
Honest to God, I really think that there is a buzz. So now, when you're going to release 3 to 5, you know, let's be honest now. It is not an unknown entity. This is sequels to the first 2, and people are hungry for it. The first few got great reviews. I saw nothing but glowing reviews about it. So I was thrilled to see that and was very excited for you. I was sorry to hear how it got shut down and the whole rigmarole that went through it. I was texting Alan day to day. He'd be like, keep going, keep going. You know, I was trying to cheer him on because I knew how much work he put into it. And you got to realize when you put so much work into something and, you know, you're setting it sail and it's going down there and people are enjoying it and then it's ready to get shut down, it's not cool. It's very upsetting. There's a lot of time and effort and money. He's put his own money into this, guys. I mean, again, he's a fan trying to do the right thing. So, listen, Alan, it's been great having you back, man. Thank you so much. You are always welcome on this podcast. It's great to speak with you, and we're excited to let our fans know that 3 through 5 is going to be out. You're going to be able to see the whole thing. Watch the whole thing. You know what? Watch 1 through 2 again, too. Let's get the whole thing going so you see the whole 2.5 hours, and you guys can write us in some letters and tell us what you think about it, because I know you're all going to be thrilled. Thanks so much, man. We really appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you guys, and no offense, but I hope I'm never on your show again.
Van Halen's sound, if there is any design to it at all, the sound of Van Halen is meant to spill over all over your turntable and ruin the rest of your records. You know, our stuff is made to have that kind of combustion to it, that sound, and you'll lose that if you continue to go over and over and 50 times. You'll get it musically correct, but it's going to lose some of that pizzazz. It's got to have heart to it. You know, if you take a Van Halen record and you stick it in your collection, it'll melt all your other records.
Take a trip to the rock concerts of the 80s in this new full-color 300-page book, Pictures Alive, filled with never-before-seen photos. Go back and see the mighty Van Halen at their peak from 2 amazing concerts in 1982 and 1984, plus photos from Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth solo tours, and many other bands of the day. Filled with amazing photos, classic stories, original ticket stubs, and more. If you're a fan of Van Halen, you will not be disappointed. Hit the ground running with Pictures Alive, the new book, now available at picturesalive.net. That's picturesalive.net. picturesalive.net. Get it today. Pick up the new coffee table-sized book, The Decade That Rocked, by legendary rock photographer Mark Weissguy Weiss. This 376-page book has hundreds and hundreds of full-color photos that Weiss shot through the 80s for magazines like Circus, Faces, and Hit Parader, featuring bands like Van Halen, Motley Crue, Twisted Sister, Bon Jovi, Skid Row, Guns N' Roses, Ozzy Osbourne, and more. There's even behind-the-scenes stories to go with these colorful, eye-popping pictures. The Decade That Rocked. A new book by rock photographer Mark Weiss is available for purchase now. Go to thedecadethatrocked.com, where there are exclusive bundles available with extra prints, t-shirts, and even patches. Inquire about the Van Halen bundle, especially made for Dave and Dave Unchained listeners. Order today. The Decade That Rocked. It'll rock your world.
Hi, this is Joe Satriani, and you're listening to Dave and Dave Unchained.
Hey folks, I'd like to introduce you to the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast. Welcome to the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast, where no stone is left unturned in the show's epic quest to review and dissect every single rock album ever made. You can find the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast wherever podcasts can be found, including Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Our website address is classicrockalbumbyalbum.libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN.com. And we can be reached on Facebook at fb.me/Classic Rock Album by Album. See you soon from the Classic Rock Album by Album podcast.
Martin Popoff here. Hope you're enjoying this latest episode of Dave and Dave Unchained, the Wise Swamis on all things VH. Just wanted to remind you that at martinpopoff.com, I've got 2 Van Halen books that I wrote. One is Van Halen, a visual biography, which is basically a big hardcover coffee table book, 400 images, 20,000 word detailed timeline. And the other one is called Unchained, a Van Halen user manual. It's the sort of 120,000 word, very academic, a lot of crazy chapters, a lot of trivia, wordy book that I did on Van Halen. So yes, go to martinpopoff.com. I sign and ship those out of my office here in Toronto. There's PayPal buttons for the US, international, and Canada. Again, Van Halen, a visual biography, and Unchained, a Van Halen user manual. Back to Dave and Dave.
They think alike. They're into a lot of their musical tastes are basically the same, and I mean they probably play as well together as any 2 musicians ever could, and sometimes it's kind of like I'm going, get my foot in the door here so I can air it out, you know, and get my 2 cents in. But it's great though, and you know, and on the other hand, they are brothers, so you got that human element of it. But as far as musicians go, I mean, I've never met any 2 brothers or 2 musicians in a band, for that matter, that are just locked in, just like that.
Hi, Dave.
Hey, Jason. How are you, buddy?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
It's great to talk to you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
So now it's been almost 10 years that you're in the Circle, which is incredible. What's it like to work for Sammy Hagar?
Sammy and the Circle, as we like to say, is the fun, is a very chilled, happy, fun environment where I can just sit back and literally be the drummer and I don't have to stress about anything. Sammy can do all the stressing, and it's very rarely that he stresses. I just saw the guys. I was in California and I got to see Mike and Sammy on the last day I was there. So we hadn't seen each other for a few months. So it was very cool. We had a great time and we were discussing what we're going to do, you know, later on this year and next year. And that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have some surprises and really do a big summer tour next year. And especially the way we're thinking of doing it is definitely going to make people fully aware.
Tell me, so how do you and Sammy connect? What is the bond there?
The bond is just a mutual respect. I first jammed with him in 87 and I was still partying and drinking back then. We'd never met each other before and it was as if we knew each other really well. And he had a lot of respect for my old man and Zeppelin, and so there was a mutual respect there. Then fast forward many years later, literally it was one of those incidents where I bumped into him on tour and he said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm out with my band and we're opening up for Heart." We found out where I lived and he goes, I'm playing Fort Lauderdale in a couple of weeks. Why don't you come to the show? I literally drove to the show. We started talking about cars, and at the time I got a McLaren MP4 12C, and he was like, oh, bring it to the show. I'd love to see it. So, usual style of a drummer, I got there late. He'd already started. And he came running over to the side of the stage, while Vic was soloing, and said, do you know Pancake? And I was like, yeah. And then he goes, okay, I'll call you up in a couple of songs. So typical me, I ran to the car and bought it again on iTunes just to make sure I knew it. And then got back up. And then the next day he called and said, me and Mike and Vic talked about it. We want you to be in the band. And that, as I said, that was literally, next year will be 10 years.
Yeah.
10-year anniversary next year.
It's incredible. Now, you guys have really expanded your set list. You've put a ton more of Van Halen in the set list. Yeah. How did that whole thing come about?
Well, this was something, I don't want to say too much. Yeah, we started doing it on the last tour. We started adding some of the early stuff. But the plan for next year is to do a lot more. Basically, to really build the show and have like a beginning, middle, end where we really can feature the time periods in a correct way. And, Sammy is very up for this. Just what I was telling him, it's the music that is the important thing here, that people really want to hear it. And I said, it works for me. And I never played in the original. I have played with Led Zeppelin a couple of times, but not in that aspect. So the fact that if it's done respectfully, if we do it well, what a great way to start a show is with some early Van Halen. And then Sammy comes on at a period which expands to the next period. And then we go off and do a bit of Zepp. And then we go back and do some Sammy solo stuff. And then we mix it well up together. Plus there's a chance that we might have some special guests which would come and join us and to make it very special and celebrate the music. So, I can't wait. Every time I speak to Mikey now, we got different ideas of which ones we keep going. What about so-and-so? What about this one? I'm very fortunate. I was a huge fan when I was a kid and still am. And I actually got to see them play Donington in 1984.
Wow.
The final year when Dave was, right before he left and right before Sammy came in. So I saw that Donington performance and I was blown away. I absolutely, Alex was a hero of mine. It's the weirdest thing. I'm playing with Mike now and I tell him on a regular basis. I was a kid at that show. I was 17 years old and I was with my girlfriend who's now my wife, who's still my wife. And we were there looking at you guys going, oh my God, aren't they so cool? These guys are the coolest. Yeah.
So what's it like locking in with Michael Anthony? Obviously, there's a special relationship between a bassist and a drummer.
Yeah, I mean, he is an anchor. He really is. And if anything, he's great for me. I mean, he's so when we do like Pancake, I mean, his forearm, there's no plectrum picking stuff. It's fingers and forearm. No wonder he's got that massive forearm of his.
Right.
And, he just pedals so well. It's so unified. I mean, that's the thing. When you play with your fingers, you play with different fingers. But when you get it so on the money, the way he hits it, it's super. And he's just his little runs and his little idiosyncrasies. They're so unique to Michael. And I just love it. It's a pure pleasure for me.
And some people have always questioned his contributions, but I would imagine coming from you, you can attest to his incredible musicianship, right?
Yeah, I mean, and when I recorded with him, there was no doubt in my mind that he was on the money. I mean, to the point of where I was like, you know what, let's do it again. Live it wasn't anywhere near as good as that. Yeah, no, honestly. And his sound, literally, I've seen him plug several different basses into different rigs, and it's Michael Anthony. There's a certain thing. It's, crazy. No, it's a super amazing guy to be around and fun. And the energy between those two, between him and Sam.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope when I'm 60, and that's a few years away yet,
right,
that I have the energy they have.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, they have a special blend. Their voices and their energy on stage together, in my opinion, really defined the Van Hagar era of Van Halen, because when I think of that era, I think of those two because they were really very important to that era for sure. That's the truth. Now, do you know Dave, Eddie, or Alex? Did you ever know any of them?
Well, I didn't know them. I obviously knew of them. I'd spoken to Eddie once. I was with Steve Lukather doing a project in London, and he got me to call Eddie one time for some reason. I remember I rang him up and he goes, who is this? And I'm like, hey, it's Jason Bonham. And he goes, how'd you get my number? I went, I'm with Steve Lukather right no, we just wanted to, he goes, put Steve on the phone. Yeah, I think we woke him up. I think that's what it was.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I met Alex once at Donington. That was all those years ago. And it wasn't the meeting I was hoping it would be.
Okay.
But then Michael said, you know what, we went to see your dad one time, and we'd heard he was in the Rainbow, and we were playing next door at Gazzara's. And in between sets, we ran around to see him. And he goes, and your dad took a swing at Alex.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, maybe he was still in. So when this kid walked up to him and said, hey, I'm John Bonham's son, he went, so what?
Oh,
yeah, that was my introduction to Alex Van Halen.
What about Dave? Do you know Dave?
I actually got to work with Dave many years later, and my band in the 80s, we opened up for him in England and Europe.
Wow.
We toured with him on the Little Ain't Enough tour. I mean, yeah, I got to hang with him probably more than any of the others. We had a couple of nights where I was told I wasn't supposed to hang with him, and a couple of nights he said, hey, Jason, you want to come and smoke whatever, or drink? It was all back in my bad days.
Right.
So I was to oblige. I didn't want to turn down the headline artist, in his hospitality, so I would go in there and hang. So.
How did you guys get on?
We're fine, I believe. I mean, I was told the next day by his manager not to do that again.
Oh, okay.
I was the encouragement.
Oh, I see.
If they were trying to keep people together, it was getting two people that could be very bad together. Together was not a good idea. But I enjoyed it, and I look back on it. It was fun. We didn't do anything harm. We didn't do anybody any harm.
Okay. So now, how many Van Halen songs do you guys have worked up at this point?
Oh, wow. A lot. Whether we do them all, I don't know. I have recordings that myself, Mike, and Vic, we always used to jam while Sam wasn't there. And out of respect, we wouldn't never jam the ones with Dave while Sam was around. We didn't want to disrespect Sam. But, I mean, we've done nearly all of the most, I'd say, 75% of the Van Hagar period.
Wow.
We played at some point, from even to tracks like Mine or Mine and In and Out, Black and Blue,
wow,
Cabo Wabo, Judgment Day. We've done a lot. I mean, I love every aspect of the band, from the Dave and the Sam. I might not know every hit and smash and thing, but I generally can work my way up to any of those songs, from Atomic Punk to Dance the Night Away. And there's all different favorites, Ice Cream Man and to Panama, to Hot for Teacher, to Janie's Crying. They're all classics to me.
Did it surprise you that Sam allowed Dave era songs in the set?
Not once. The realization of what we were doing, it was, and what we were doing it for,
okay,
which was that the fact of we were doing songs that came from, Mikey is on stage with us, so it is part of his history. They were acknowledging, also the passing and the greatness of Eddie in a respectful way. So it was as that, we're not trying to glorify anything. This is part of the history of the band, and at the moment, no one's out there playing it other than us. So,
that's true. How were the fans reacting to it?
As soon as we hit it, and it comes in the weirdest thing is it comes in the part of the set where you're like, it's been in a perfect, slot. So it's right, there's a breath of fresh air where you're suddenly not expecting it. And then as soon as we do the two early Van Halen songs, we were then going into the Zeppelin stuff. So, and then we were hitting the big Van Hagar periods like Right Nows and the Why Can't This Be Loves.
Right.
So it was like boom, 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 boom. Like at the end, it was like smack. It was like a boxer's final round. You're in the 10th round and you've got to go for the knockout. Well, we delivered 8 punches towards the end, and we still had 3 more songs to go. It was hit after hit after hit after hit.
Yeah. The band's latest album, Crazy Times, is a really solid effort, fantastic record. How has the fan reaction been to that album?
I mean, excellent. I mean, I wish we'd have toured more. We literally finished the tour as the album came out.
Right. That was interesting. Yeah. You ended the tour, then the album came out after the tour.
Yeah. For me, I mean, I had a great time recording with Dave Cobb. I'd recorded with him before. So when we got together, I mean, literally there was only about 4 songs that were really written. So everything else was kind of arranged and written in the studio. So it was a great collab on different songs. I mean, we pulled some songs right out of the hat in the room. And Dave was playing rhythm guitar with us while we were doing it. And just great to work in RCA Studios, in the old Elvis room, and just play live. And that's how we did it. We did it as a live band and got the basics down. And then, if we had to do anything, some of the vocals were even done done as we did it. Very different way. I mean, even Mike said this is a very different way to recording how I was used to doing it. You know, everything was done to around the drums, and once we got the drums, it was like then they did the bass, and then they'd redo the guitar, and then they'd redo this. So he said, the fax, he goes, I can't believe we haven't got to fix everything. I said, well, that's the way it is. If it doesn't need fixing, if it doesn't need to be fixed, why fix it?
Right. So now, do you think you'll do more recording with the Circle before you go out next year?
That I don't know. I'm not too sure. I mean, obviously, because we didn't get to play some of these songs live, I think we'll probably promote some of the songs and release maybe something in the beginning of the year that people get used to hearing again and know that we have material out there. And just looking forward to playing again, you know.
Yeah. Do you think the show will be an evening with, or do you think you'll share a bill?
That I don't know. That's the one good thing I'm glad when it comes to all the business side of Sammy, I leave it clearly up to those boys. I just come in and get on the plane, go to my hotel. It's fun. I just get to just be me. I don't got to worry about how we're going to do it, what we're going to do. I'm just like, hey, when you give me the set list, I'll put in my 10 cents of what I think we should do and with the order we should do it in. But other than that, it's going to be fun.
Do you think you'll do deeper cuts on the Van Halen side next time out, or do you think you'll go for more of the hits?
I think just the way we've been doing, I think there'll definitely be a larger amount of the period.
Okay.
And now he definitely wants to do more songs. That was the one great thing when we got to Cabo, because it's 3 nights. We always kind of switch up the Van Halen songs. Mm-hmm. So that's how we got to do so many others. But definitely, as we look at it, we'll be focusing on definitely making people happy and hopefully giving them something that they haven't seen us do before.
And what is the pre-show ritual that you guys have before you hit the stage?
Sammy does a prayer. We do a prayer right before we go on, and we just, we thank the Lord. Whatever you see him as, the larger, the power, your inner soul, just we thank him and say, hey, let's go on there and do it and be grateful and give the people the best we can.
And will there be any more Black Country Communion?
Yes, there will. We just recorded a new album. We just did that in 7 days like we normally do. We went in there with no songs pre-written. Actually, it was in 8 days. We did 8 days of recording. We finished 11 songs that were literally just strumming and a bit of things. When we got them, there was like 2 iPhone versions of the song of like strumming an acoustic guitar. We just arranged them and fine-tuned them in the studio. I haven't heard Glenn sing on anything yet, or Joe, but we did all the music. So all that is done, and all overdubs have been done, because literally another thing, we do it as a band and live. And that was fun. We haven't seen each other for a long time. Some of us, we haven't since we were in the studio last time. So I haven't seen Glenn since 2018.
Wow.
But it was cool. I enjoy playing, and Joe's an amazing player, and Derek and Glenn. Plus, it was good to keep the chops up, see Kevin, Shirley, and back at the helm, and we had a good week.
Wanted to ask you, what kind of Zeppelin set are you doing this time out with Led Zeppelin Evening?
Well, we've decided, as it's the 50th anniversary of House of the Holy, that we would definitely represent that album a bit more than we normally would. It's very difficult when you've only got a certain amount of time. There's certain songs, I believe, that should always be in the set that you can't do without. So we like to try and keep everyone as happy as possible, and also ourselves. For, believe it or not, this is our 13th year of doing this.
Wow.
Something that we only said we'd do one tour 13 years ago. It kind of took a life of itself. As I said, we've all got our favourites, but we thought we can add some deeper Zeppelin cuts into the show. There's definitely a good chance of things like No Quarter coming out, just because it's one of those iconic songs from House of the Holy. It takes a life in its own. In the middle section, we extend and go into a whole jam sequence, just like they did in Summer Men's Day.
Do you feel pressured to deliver because you're a Bonham, and also because of your heritage? You're not just some regular band playing Zeppelin music, and because the music is so legendary, does that add a pressure for you?
I mean, definitely I'm fully aware of the importance. This is something I take very seriously. As much as it's fun, I'm representing the music of my father, Robert and Jimmy and John Paul. So there is an added pressure I put on myself. I wouldn't be still doing it if I didn't think we could play it well. It's one of those things that I never intentionally thought we would be doing. When we did a festival just recently, we played at the Welcome to Rockville in Daytona Beach. It was 6:15 in the evening. We came on stage to 47,000 people going crazy. And I was kind of a little choked, and out of the tears welled up in my eyes. I just never imagined that the love we were getting from an audience. In the bill, we were the second youngest or third youngest band on the bill, playing the oldest music. It was very overwhelming.
Yeah.
At the same time, my friend says, but it's the music. You're going on playing music that everyone knew. In the 50-minute set we did, there wasn't one song that wasn't a huge radio hit. So it was,
right.
He says, if you you didn't go down well, you'd be wrong.
That's true. Now, how would you describe your drumming style next to your father's?
I would just say I try and play from what he taught me, which was play from the heart, and just try and remember that it's groove and pocket that is the important thing before anything else. And that was something when I was younger, I was all about, typical youngster, you want to do all the chops and you're kind of oblivious to groove and pocket. And it's not until you get older and wiser that you suddenly find yourself really focusing on groove and pocket and tempo and making sure everything is in the right place.
And when you do the Zeppelin songs, do you try to do it letter perfect according to the recording, or do you do your own interpretation?
I think since when I got to play with the boys in 2007, there was a lot of time in the rehearsal I spent playing it exactly the same as the record. And that was a stressful thing, because you're trying to remember it exactly from what the album. And then there was a couple of songs I really liked from the way they played them live at Song Remained the Same in 73. So I would focus on those performances. And then right at the end, somebody said to me, "Are you having fun?" And I said, "No, it's really sucking the fun out of it because I'm focused so much on trying to replicate Dad." And they said to me, "Well, why don't you just be Jason and your John will come naturally?" Literally the next day I showed up and I remember Robert saying, I played the first song and they went, "Where have you been? You're back." It was true. The person that played the first day when we did the ton of the test in the water on June 10th, 2007, vanished for the next rehearsals because he was so focused on picking the right drum kit, which was like Dad's, and the same microphones that Dad had and the same drum fills. I'd forgot to be just what my dad said to do, was play from the heart and go for it, And that was the thing that I really loved about the performance in 2007. Throughout all the rehearsals, it wasn't until the actual show day that I took as many chances as I did. I actually gave me more confidence. The longer we got into the show, the more risks I took. Definitely, even in Black Dog, I started to change things up a bit. And even my friend said, "Ramble On," he said, "Once I started seeing you hit your head on the certain sections, like as if you're beating your head with the stick, because I knew you were relaxed. When you can start showboating and you're playing with Led Zeppelin's second song, and
sure,
he goes, this is going to be fun." And it was one of those wonderful nights that I remember clearly, and it wasn't over quickly. It was great. I can remember every part of every song, even to where I screw up in Dazed and Confused and came in too soon. Yeah, so it was one of those things. So when I play it now, actually I have some of the performances. I've gone back and gone, I want to tone it down a little bit here, or I use those references. I still have the reference points of where I like to start from, which is one of the best performances for me of Kashmir was from Nedworth, 1979. And people like the way I played that at the Celebration Day DVD, and it really started with the performance of my father in 79, which was that version of Kashmir. And if anyone knows it, they'll know why I did what I did when I did the little things, the things that only the true fans will notice.
Sure.
Which version I play.
Sure. And which song has really been connecting lately with the crowd the most?
It could be a few of the things. In Australia, one of the biggest songs, which I'd never noticed anywhere else in the world was they would sing Since I've Been Loving You from start to finish, which was the craziest thing because we do the 73 Song of the Same version. And the fact that you could hear them singing that song, which is a blues, scat kind of vocal song, was amazing. I'd never heard that before. But I think Ramble On is a huge crowd favourite. As soon as that bass line kicks in, you can start hearing them singing like, "Leaves are falling all around."
Right.
I was, it gets in the mood. It's a good one in an outdoor summer vibe. It's got that build, and then the feel, you can't help but start getting into it.
How many from Houses of the Holy are you putting in the set?
I would say, depending on how long we play, no quarter, which will be 9 minutes, I guess, of that one. I'd say Ocean, possibly Song Remains the Same, 2, 3. I'd say a good 4 from Houses of the Holy.
And what are some of the anthems that you can't leave out?
Oh, Whole Lot of Love, Rock and Roll, thing like Ramble On, Immigrant Song. I think they're all great songs to play with in an environment. But, if we have longer than 50 minutes, if we do an hour, we'll definitely be throwing in the Black Dog and Stairway. But it's one of those things that you want to try and end on a high rather than a low. And sometimes if you start Stairway at the certain point of the show, it's 4 minutes before it really gets gets going. So it can sometimes, in that environment, I think you have to be careful. One of the strangest things was when I did it with Zepp was where we put it like 5 songs before the end, whereas everyone then was guessing what was going to come afterwards.
Would you ever consider doing a live album with Led Zeppelin Evening?
I get asked that a lot. I'm not too sure that anyone needs that. There's Led Zeppelin is out there to be bought. Yeah, I don't know. I always say all I try and do is remind you of those times. It's more of to make you go, you know what, I'm going to go and get that Zeppelin album again on vinyl or whatever. So my love for it is never to try and take it anything further than what we're doing. We're here to remind you of the good days. I'm not trying to sell you something. This is a feel-good show to take you back in time.
Whoa! How about that for rock video music fans? Live all day, all night. You know what you need. Only right here on Dave TV.
Check us out on Facebook at Dave and Dave Unchained, a Van Halen podcast, on Twitter at DD Unchained, on Instagram at DD Unchained Podcast, and you can email us at ddunchainedpodcast@gmail.com.
They're basically going to do a Van Halen show next summer. They're planning an entire thing with Dave songs and Sam songs, and then he said it's going to be a surprise special guest in the set. He said they're going to be doing more Van Halen than they've ever done before, and they're going to do it like a lineage. I was blown away because his attitude is, I got half the band, meaning him and Mike.
Right.
And Jason says, you know how they do Led Zeppelin in the set because of Jason? He's like,
right.
Fuck it, we'll do some old Van Halen because Mike's in the set. This is this show that Sammy always wanted to do, the lineage show, where he's playing like Montrose and old Sammy and new Sammy and Chickenfoot. And apparently it's like already being set up. So you have to realize, because Sammy's a smart businessman, and he kept saying, we're the only ones out there playing this music. He knows what he's up to, this guy. His attitude is like, fuck, Wolf doesn't want to do anything, Al doesn't want to do anything, Dave's not going to do anything, Gary's out doing Extreme, fuck it, we'll take it. You watch, Sam is going to be doing more David Lee Roth songs than he ever did when he was in Van Halen. I'm so curious as to what this is going to be. He said this is like a full-blown tour.
Wow.
This is like going to be like a rock tour. But you got to remember, the only way Sam's going to get like that level of a tour is if he promises the promoters to promote it as like, you know, Sammy sings Van Halen kind of thing.
Right, right.
So, and then I don't know what the special guest is. I mean, I can't imagine he's going to take Roth out. But I don't know. Who the fuck knows?
Well, I know, like, he always wanted to do that history of Sam.
That's his thing.
Like, he always wanted to get, like, a big-name guitarist.
Yeah.
But he never seemed to be able to do that. So, you know, he would just bring Vic. I mean, he's not a bad guitarist at all, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But, you know, in terms of, like, name recognition, and that's not going to do the job. I mean, that's at least what I'm thinking of. Like, who he's bringing on as a special guest. He's getting, like, some hotshot guitarist to tour with him and do some of the Van Halen stuff.
What, is he going to have Vic clean out the bus?
Well, no, he'll have him play and do rhythm guitar. Or they'll switch off. Vic will do the Sammy solo songs that are still there. And, you know, who knows?
He's like, hey, Vic, how about we have the bus boys open up the circle? The boys are back in town.
I think you and I would be like the only ones who would like even know that song. So.
Oh, well, that's a classic from '82.
Taking my vacation in New Montana. But you should have seen the tables turn when they all stopped the Honolulu. Said no money. Now we're doing the whole line out and run. We play some melody. I'm the lady like mine, baby. Get the air squeeze it on me. Get the air squeeze it on me. makes me happy and day. It's like a little bit of Waikiki, dominant in the car seat. Wouldn't ask for my anyway. Then I told him I was wrong. Maybe Anthony Joe. I'd be taking my vacation in MIT. But you should have seen the table set. When they all sat around Honolulu, said someone to me. She put my whole life in our hand, bro. That's my free page and